Let them know then.
Yeah, that's just not cool.
So who's at the meeting, Kate? Hi, Steve.
Morning, Alan.
Thanks for your help earlier on.
Okay, it's still coming into you.
Sorry? Oh,
Still
mate.
more files coming in.
Now that's amazing, eh? I'm not sure how we're meant to be keeping up with it all, but we seem to be managing okay.
Yeah.
Morning, Shane. I'll just hang on and wait for our leader to join us. A little light coming through.
Morning, Shane. Morning, Steve. Morning, Alan.
Morning, sir. Got plenty to read.
Yeah, I was going to make a comment on that. Yes. Morning, Lachlan.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Mr. Baldowney.
Morning, sir.
Oh, I like that.
Even put a tie on for you.
I wouldn't expect anything less from a lawyer.
Well, we had less last time, I seem to remember, Alan.
Well, yeah. I think I'll just leave the comments there.
Yes. Right.
How do I, to make an initial submission on behalf of Greenseed that we consider that Mr. Muldowney wearing a tie is unnecessary formality in terms of Section 39 of the Act.
I'll get rid of it.
Whatever makes people comfortable, that's fine. Steve, are there any other matters just before we start?
You've been circulating the documents I've had as of a few minutes ago, so yeah, I'm all clear on my desk.
Right, all right. Well, it's past, so let's resume day 2 of the PC7 Rotokari North plan change hearing. For those of you who weren't here whenever it was we were last together, my name's David Hill, and with me sitting as independent commissioners are Alan Watson and Shane Solomon. Just a couple of very short matters before we formally commence. Just to note that Commissioners Watson and I did do I guess what you might call an off-site visit to Auranga Drury on Monday to have a look at the I guess the offset duplexes that we were referred to through Mr. Munro's evidence. Well, not really going to say anything more about that, apart from the fact that we saw the what's being referred to as the permitted activity options in terms of duplexes. Alan, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think it was interesting to do it. I think the downside was we weren't able to stop for a coffee somewhere, but interesting enough, the queue at Oranga, there was about 10 people deep waiting for coffee. So probably not a wise idea anyway.
Yeah, and probably fair enough to observe that with the amount of tradies and their utes and vans and goodness knows what else around the area, it wasn't really an opportunity to appreciate the, I guess, the suburb as it will eventually turn out to be. There was very heavily trafficked. Second point to note is that we have received 18 pieces of information since about early yesterday evening. 11 statements from summary statements from council, or 10 summaries and one rather lengthier one from Mr. Black. 4 pieces of information through from Greenseed and 3 pieces from submitters. I haven't had the opportunity to catch up with my co-commissioners at this point in time, but I've certainly had the opportunity to look at all of those thanks to an early start. And I'm just looking see whether commissioners, you two, have also had that opportunity, just as a bit of a guide as we go to the day as to how much we can take as read. So can just give me a steer on that, either of you.
Yeah, I've read the information received.
Okay.
You're good with me, thanks, David. Yeah, I've had a look through it all.
Okay, all right, thank you very much, and thank you for. Well, I don't know whether it's thank you, but I'll say thank you for providing all that information to us overnight. I've done for the commissioners' benefits, I've done a side-by-side on the trigger table with what where everyone seems to, or where the 3 main parties I think have ended up. But if Mr. Black is there, I just want to just get a confirmation. Mr. Black, are you here? Can you turn yourself on just for a second? Right. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Black. I just want to confirm with you in terms of your attachment 4 to your statement, which is on, and particularly on page 33. If you just want to turn that up. Yep. Which is your option 3A. I just want to confirm, just because this will be helpful as we go through, I just want to confirm with you that in the construction or improvement box, that the words leading into that statement should read without the minor arterial in place.
Yes, yeah, I think yes, it should do. Yes, yeah, it should match.
All right, that's fine. I just wanted to be clear that that was the qualification on that option. All right, thank you. As I say, I've generated a table so that we can see the side-by-side options of all 3 parties on that one as we go through. Since I'm intuiting, and it's not really terribly intuitive, but I'm intuiting that in actual fact we'll spend most of the day on traffic issues, and the triggers are obviously a fundamental part of that. So that's fine. And just to anticipate, Mr. Muldowney, for you, I think there's only 2 of the summary statements, or one of the summary statements, I think, which is from Mr. Sharman. There's a minor issue with one of the other witnesses, and I've just lost something on my computer here, so I'll come back to that. But in the main, those summary statements, I don't think we really need the majority of the people to come before us, unless something in the course of the day eventuates that they want to comment on. So just to save us time. Okay,
that's very helpful. So that was going to be my question, was just what you needed from us. Can I just say, just in relation to the volume of the material that's been provided overnight, it's obviously a hard call as to just how much you put before the commissioners, but what we wanted to do was try and make the process as efficient as possible so that we could hopefully get the proceeding concluded today.
Yeah.
And so it was felt that the most efficient way to deal with it was to get the statements to you, hopefully have them pre-read, and it sounds like they have been, and then no one's taken by surprise, and we can get straight to the real issues. So all of that's also been pre-circulated to the Green Seed team. So hopefully that should assist with the efficiency. So can I take it, sir, just based on that statement, that principally Mr. Black and Mr. Sharman, of course, will need to be patched in all day. That's expected. But for the others, if they just keep a bit of a watching brief, and if anything comes up, we can ask them to patch back in, perhaps.
Yes, yes, no, that's fine. And I think, I think the only other issue was a very minor disagreement, I think, or it's not even disagreement, between Mr. Harting and Mr. Munro on the issue of the duplexes, but it's not a major issue, that one.
Okay, I'll look into that and see if we can get some clarity on that point. The only other point, just while I've got the floor, Sue, was just the question of whether there's anything that I can do to assist in terms of any legal issues that have arisen during the course of the hearing. If there's anything you want to hear from me on as part of the Section 42 presentation, if I'm able to get a heads up, I can look into matters for you. But as I discern it, my sense is that there doesn't appear to be any critical legal issues that have arisen that I'm aware of. But I'm in your hands on that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I'll just check with Alan and Shane. I certainly have no outstanding matters that require that. Shane shaking his head. Alan, have you got any matters?
Yeah, no, all good with me, thanks.
Okay. That's great. I mean, the only point that I would raise, and it may be that it comes up, is that I know that the infrastructure triggers associated with the transportation matters are going to be a critical matter for you. And with triggers like that, where there is staging and stage release of land, often matters of efficiency come into play in terms of Section 32, and also questions around how the infrastructure will be provided. And I just wanted to say that if you're not already aware, there is a fairly substantial private development agreement that sits in behind the plan change, which addresses much of the infrastructure related matters. And so just so that for your awareness, I don't think it's been tabled and it's in the evidence yet, and nor does it necessarily need to be, but just so that you're aware, there is a separate instrument that is addressing a number of matters concerning the responsibility and the design of those critical infrastructure matters.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think we are aware of that. I think I can't recall whether it's through the 42A or whether it was through the pre-circulated opening legal submissions, but certainly we're aware of that PDA and the details that you say provided Hamilton City and the proponent are relaxed about the coverage of that. We don't need to go there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Good. Mr. Berry, do you have any update matters that you want to bring to our attention?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I was just going to simply note that while we were taken a little bit by surprise that we should get such a lengthy statement from Mr. Black at such a late stage, I'm grateful to our witnesses, Ms. Fraser-Smith, Tollemache and Hills, to pull together at fairly short order and very succinctly a response to that. And so those are the two very brief further statements that you've referred to. Yep. And so in terms of the direction that was issued, those are the documents that are headed transport provisions with red writing on, and transport provisions with a table in it. So you've acknowledged that you have those.
Yeah, and thanks to Mr. Hills for pulling that together. I must say it's given me an appetite now for such short notice directions in future. I think they're very efficient. Yes.
Same day would be over the top, but yeah, yesterday was more easy to deal with. Secondly, sir, we are grateful for the signal from Mr. Muldowney that the vast majority of the people that we can see on the screen will not be on the clock for the most part of the hearing, which has been a bit of a concern for my client. And the last is a very practical matter, but because we need to order sustenance, we could have a fairly fixed signal as to when the lunch adjournment is going to be. That would be very helpful. But beyond that, sir, and also to confirm that in our view, having reviewed our notes from day one, we see no burning legal or, well, it won't be preliminary issues now because we're well into it, but I agree with Mr. Muldowney that, and the panel that we see nothing that we really need to address you on, or we would be doing so.
All right. Well, thank you for that indication. I'm happy to staple in a relatively firm lunch break. If you want to suggest a time, I mean, 12:30, 1 o'clock. What's the feel?
It's 10 now. 12:30. Yeah. Would that be right, sir?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
12:30.
12:30. All right. Well, let's make a note of that and aim for that. Right, so that you can perish the thought. We wouldn't want you fainting through hunger at this point in time, Greenseed.
Yes, sir.
Yes. All right. Those are my preliminaries. Alan, Shane, any other matters? No.
No.
Okay.
No, all good with me, thanks.
All right. Well, let's turn to the agenda, and I think first up this morning is Ms. Van Asbeck, and if you wouldn't mind just turning your screen on. And let me just note, I think most people do seem to have their screens off and their microphones muted, so when you're not appearing, please observe that. Thank you. Ms. Asbeck, Ms. Van Asbeck. I don't actually see Miss Van Asbeck on the running board. Does anybody know where she is? Has anybody got? Steve, you
She's on the running board at my
oh,
end.
she is now. Right. Excellent.
Sorry.
That's all right.
This is the first time I've spoken at a hearing, so
Right. Well, when you're ready, Miss Van Asbeck, just
what do I say? I mean, I have
we have your submission. It's just a matter of whether you want to elaborate on anything that elaborate further on anything that was in your submission.
No, just especially emphasising the drainage and also the access. Since last Wednesday, the hearing, I have heard from Gary Nolan, and we have Kristen Kendall. I'm speaking on behalf of Kristen Kendall and Hugh Van Asbeck because we have the same concerns. The three of us are Zoom meeting tomorrow to discuss the roundabout design.
Right. All right. Well, I mean, that's good news. I mean, we did give a fairly strong hint, I think, at the end of the last hearing that would be a sensible thing to do. So it's good. It's good that the approach has been made and that you have a fixture for discussing that. So.
And the other thing is, and I in my submissions, I provided photos of the drainage system where outside 336, which is where the roundabout is expected to be. And our concerns have always been the drainage system, which does not cope with what it's meant to be doing now. And any more road runoff is just going to compound the flooding that occurs in my property since the drainage system was changed for the road to become a highway in 2013-14. The water has just flowed into my property, and in 2019 a survey was done, And prior to the new drain, the drain was lower than my land. After the new drain went in, it is higher than my land. So the water just runs over the roadside drain, but also the drain, water just sits there. Most recently, as of this year, the discussions are still ongoing with Wakatatahi, but they put cameras down. There's no blockages, but it's quite low lying there, and the water just sits in the drain, and then just our land can't drain because it's higher than the drain, lower than the drain. I mean, sorry.
Well, I'm assuming from what you're saying there that the conversations with Wakakotahi are going on, and it's good to hear that Mr. Nolan will be talking to you about the roundabout. And obviously that issue will need to be resolved as part and parcel of that, but I'm not sure that we can take that any further at this point, Ms. Van Asbeck. Let me just see if commissioners would like to question you on any matters. Shane?
I thank you. I had no questions.
All right, Helen?
Yeah, just to make the point for Laurie that, we understand what the concerns are, and the information you provided was helpful to the three of us in understanding that. And we just want to be sure that as far as the project goes, that you have some consultation with these people so that you know what's happening. So you don't just have, as I think we said last week, some people arrive one day and then the next day, a roundabout's being put in. So the main thing is to be sure, and it sounds like the proponent is actually talking to you now, which was great on their part. So I think that side of it is pretty much under control, but it's good that you've raised those concerns in this forum. So thanks.
I mean, it may be, Mr. Berry, that it would be helpful to us, at least if after that sort of conversation between Mr. Nolan and Ms. Van Asbeck, maybe you just put a memo through to the hearing panel with the outcome of that.
Happy to do so, sir. No problem.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Van Asbeck. If that's your submission, we appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. And I think then we're moving on to Kay Moroney. Ms. Moroney, are you there?
Yes.
I thought you might be.
Have you got me?
Yep. Now, at the moment, your camera's not on, I don't think.
Oh, now I've got nobody here to help me. My computer has disappeared.
On the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you'll probably see a couple of symbols. One is a microphone symbol, and the other is which is obviously on. The other is a video one. And you just click that. That should bring you up.
Right. Oh, no. It's taken me completely out.
You're still on in voice, so
yeah, I don't know.
Not completely lost.
Oh, no, this is a bit sad, actually.
Well, don't worry too much if the video refuses to cooperate. We can hear you. So why don't you take us through the statement that you sent through, or that Steve sent through just a few moments ago.
Okay. So would you like me to read this out, sir, or just?
Well, that came only a couple of minutes before we came on air. So yours is the one that I haven't read yet. So probably just as well for you to go through it for us.
Okay, correct. Good morning to all. My name is Kay Moroney, a resident and a submitter of the area, and will be speaking on behalf of myself and many submitters. This is due to the COVID taking effect and many submitters not happy to speak online. Please bear with me as I am very new at this game too. On behalf of myself and submitters, I have talked to and contacted through various ways. The general consent is green seed development have let us down extremely poor. There has never been a formal meeting that any of the submitters have had notification on before this application went to council. Greenseed Development has not made contact with residents to try and resolve any concerns since we did our submissions. They state a meeting was held at the Rotokauri School on the 4th day of March 2019, but nobody whom is objecting to this PC7 plan change was informed. The applicant has not provided a record of who was invited or who attended. Also noting that Charles Marr had several meetings with people around the outskirts of this area, but they were landowners wishing to sell up for subdivisions. This is not acceptable to all ratepayers and residents in this area affected by this PC change. 2,000 houses are planned. Will this grow to 4,000 or 5,000 or even more with the new government rules for housing changes to build on sections 3 high without resource consents? We need this to be capped, as this risk further justifies major works and upgrades on the affected roads immediately. Subletting of this development to other building companies means the plan change does not protect residents. This has happened before. Other developers will not understand the plan changes, and our concerns will therefore fall by the wayside if the required transport upgrades are not adhered to, in which we have requested. In the reporting, Greenseed make statements of no roading requirements until 500 dwellings are built in the centre of this development, and therefore will not be required to upgrade roading until such time as internal link roads come out onto Burbush and Exelby roads. This could create a very large green belt or buffer zone for a lot more dwellings internally, well before works are to be carried out on these affected roads. This is avoiding the costs of roading upgrades for this major development. Unacceptable when you are applying for a rezone and jumping the queue out of sequence. The developer must pay the price to keep safety a priority. Mr. Black, reporting for Hamilton CC Traffic, noted many sections of Exelby and Burbush roads with very poor visibility, and he also thought that the development would create significant traffic effects. Mr. Black also stated that there are 35 vehicle crossings on Exelby Road that would need to be adjusted to accommodate the widening of these roads. Mr. Black originally stated that in his reporting, he recommended the threshold point for upgrades to be a 200 house build. Now there has been a change to 500 houses. What has motivated his change on this when he had significant concerns prior? If the widening of these roads goes ahead, will the landowners be included in the design, and how will construction impacts from these upgrades be managed? On the Lee Road, Exelby Road intersection, it has been highlighted that visibility has and is very poor. Mr. Hills for Greenseed made comments that this is a very quick fix. Why this has not been attended to for the past 10 years. Also, the intersection of Rotokauri Exelby roads have been requested with the HCC and Waikato Regional Council for the past 5 years to have the curbage overgrowth removed for safety and visibility. This became extremely dangerous. But note, this has been a quick fix in the past 3 months. Just wondering if action was taken due to these traffic reports. It may be reasonable to assume that HCC have been holding off on any improvements, as they know that developers will have to do them eventually. The structure plan makes this very clear that developers will do this if out of sequence. So therefore, roading should come before buildings. This is our main objection. Upgrades to these roads cannot wait until other developers come along. and until Hamilton City Council makes the minor Ontario road happen. Traffic with contractors, heavy trucks and machinery will increase on all of these roads from the very start of the subdivision to the completion. We as residents on these roads have noticed this from the start of the Rotokauri Rise development to the Hamilton Zoo upgrade to the Brymer Heights development. Traffic starts at 5:30 a.m. Exeter Road is used as a through road by a lot of subcontractors. Please note, this is due to the fact that Waikato Expressway is a bottleneck at peak times. So this is the bypass and the speed track. Also noting that a lot of commercial suppliers are in Frankton and Dinsdale area, not Te Rapa. So that is the objection for the through traffic. Furthermore, to a major safety issue, school bus and pedestrians. At present, the high school bus passes through State Highway 39 and onto Burbush Road, picking up students, and onto Exelby Road South to collect more students. There are no pull-off areas for the safety of the bus and the driver and the students. One near miss was a car coming over the approaching hill early morning, foggy conditions, well known for this area in winter, and almost rear-ended to the stopped bus. If it hadn't have been for the local knowledge of this driver, this could have been major. As I heard about this, I then approached the parents of these students and requested that the bus pulls over in our vehicle entry area where it is wider and a little safer for all parties. But bearing in mind, the students still have to walk on the unformed curb to get home safe. Please note, we are not objecting to the houses going ahead, just the roading infrastructure of the main corridors to the impacted traffic roads, State Highway 39, Exelby Road and Burbush Road and Rotokauri intersection. This brings me to addressing that no traffic counting records in the present year, no accident reporting recorded, reporting that has been supplied is out of date and estimate only, not factual. I believe this would be the biggest subdivision out of sequence that the Hamilton City Council are allowing. So therefore, extra caution should be applied by all parties and more open consultations before passed. We don't want to end up like the Thomas Road debacle, where a life was taken, and the present Peacock area where some residents are complaining of the traffic. One last major concern for residents is by allowing this PC change to go ahead, this will open the area up for future out of subsequent subdivisions to go ahead in this area. As well-known developers are sitting close by north and south to create more traffic in this area. I understand the Hamilton has a Vision Zero for road safety. Let this be applied as a well-designed and delivered infrastructure to recognise humans are fallible and that when we make a mistake, we should not pay for it with our life. Let us all work together with some form of open consultation and Green Seed's neighbour-friendly approach to all parties in a reasonable, humane way and apply safety upgrades to roads before dwellings are built. Thanking you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of myself and the submitters.
Thank you, Ms. Moroney. Now, you also sent through this morning, and I don't know that you need to go through it in detail, but you did send through an accident report for 2021. Do you want to make any sort of overall comments on that? I mean, it's a very helpful document.
Yes, the overall comments, I would just like to say that I feel personally, as residents and landowners of this area, we have been failed. Why has it taken myself and my husband to produce this updated document? And it states the accidents, and there's been a lot more accidents on this road unaccounted for in this report. Thank
Yeah,
you.
well, thank you to both of you for providing that, and obviously we'll hear a little bit more about that later on as we go through the day. Now, I'm not quite sure, Mr. Miller, were you going to introduce other members of the community, or is that the statement of all of you?
No, that is a statement of the ones that weren't prepared to go online. There are some other submitters waiting to come online as well.
Are there? Okay, all right. I'm aware that there are some watching.
Oh, no, there's
and we have, I mean, we have 4 names down here, and I wasn't quite sure how that was going to progress. So maybe what we'll do is we'll take all the submitters first of all, and then if we have any questions of you as a collective group, we'll ask those collectively, and then you can decide who's going to answer them if we've got those questions. Is that okay?
That's fine. I just need to get someone to help me here. My screen's gone down to a minimal.
Well, that's all right. I mean, your voice is coming through fine, so that's
Right.
fine. Right. Well, the next person on my list is Kate Thorley, and I noticed that I think. Yep. Good. Excellent. So, what would you like to thank you, Thorley, and would you like to speak to us? And if so, what do you want to tell us?
I just wanted to speak about my contribution to the submission, if I could. I've written something out. Tēnā koutou katoa, my name is Catherine Thorley, and I live with my family on Exelby Road. I'm speaking today with my mum and my family who are part of our farm bubble in level 3. I'm a registered nurse and small business owner, and thank you for this opportunity to express our concerns. And whilst they are subjective and from our observations, not official reports, we value the opportunity to be heard. I'm very grateful to Kay Moroney for keeping us informed about the proceedings, as we have never been invited to meetings or consultations regarding the subdivisions. And my initial understanding of this development was that Exelby Road was not going to be used as a through road for the first stages of construction, and that suitable roading was being constructed to service the development. I wondered whether the lack of information was due to us being Waikato District Council residents, not Hamilton City Council, but I'm unsure now if there was any information or whether the Waikato District Council has been involved in this process for subdivision at all. Our paramount concerns are for the safety of our children, my family, my neighbours, the community and the users of this road in this area. I have lived with my family on Exelby Road since 1990 after moving from the King Country, and have made this area my home with my young family for over 12 years. In that time, we've witnessed the road usage significantly increase. As a child growing up, we rode horses on the road to meet neighbours, biked or walked to the local school. But we strongly suggest these activities are now unsafe, and our use of the road for walking or biking has greatly decreased since the various housing developments in this area have resulted in high volumes of heavy traffic, trucks and subcontractors. This has highlighted the lack of safe walking and cycling options, particularly for Exelby and Burbush roads. In short, if it's morning or from 4:30 p.m. onwards, we avoid the roads if at all possible due to the volume of traffic travelling in both directions, making it impossible for oncoming cars to swerve over the white line to make room for cyclists or pedestrians. Over the years, I have phoned both Hamilton City Council and Waikato District Council to discuss my concerns about the volume, particularly of trucks on Exelby Road, and most recently, the safety of children using the school bus on this road. I have timed up to 6 trucks passing in a 10-minute period during the morning whilst awaiting the school bus to collect my children alone. I have watched from our house the trucks travel up and down over a blind hill on Exelby Road on the wrong side of the road, requiring over half the width of the opposite side of the road for their vehicles. I have witnessed cars having to pull off the road to avoid oncoming trucks, and on numerous occasions, I have had to walk down banks or into roadside vegetation to avoid oncoming vehicles. My children are not allowed to exercise on our road without an adult, and I work hard not to be worried about them simply getting on and off the school bus each day with a lack of visibility on Exelby Road and the speed and volume of the traffic, especially large trucks. I've expressed my concerns to both councils about the safety of this road over the years and have questioned why trucks are not able to use a more suitable, wider road such as Avalon Drive to transport machinery, landfill, water and supplies to the subdivision sites. I have been bounced between various phone calls, I've been bounced between phoning different councils, advised to dial *55 for any dangerous driving or speak to Waka Kotahi to ascertain whether trucks should even be using Exelby Road. I never understood the complexities of balancing responsibilities for community and road safety between various councils and subdividers until I became slightly aware of the process we find ourselves in as residents affected by this subdivision. I am left to wonder if this is why roading improvements have not been made to our local roads by council. Are they in fact waiting for the costs of this to be absorbed by new developers? I understand there is to be a widening of the road to 7 to 7.5 metres. Currently it measures 5.8 to 6.2 metres by a layperson. Which side of the road, we wonder, will be widened when there is a constant bouncing between both councils for even phone calls about our concerns and different councils collecting rubbish depending on which side of the road you live on? Will this be another lengthy delay in negotiations as this is decided? I don't understand why we are waiting for the roads to be upgraded after 500 houses have been built. The construction traffic will be significant, let alone the impact of increased commuter traffic. I originally understood this threshold was 200 houses for upgrading. How has this changed? Is this even a feasible arrangement considering the concerns regarding driveway visibility and areas of concerns already mentioned? Could we please request that roading upgrade and safety for pedestrians, cyclists and vehicles be upheld with the highest regard before another subdivision is permitted? I support increased and improved housing for all people in this country and region, but not at the expense of the safety of existing members of the community. The noise and dirt pollution is of concern. The only respite coming in level 3 and 4 lockdowns without heavy vehicles rumbling past and rattling our home and the land. I have travelled behind and been walking when dirt and debris has fallen off the back of trucks and seen the roads become caked with dirt from the transport to fill and earthworks machinery. I would like to ask how the natural environment and waterways leading to Lake Rotakoti have been acknowledged by the developers. I worry for the drains leading to the lake every time there is heavy rain and debris running from the road. Are all of the factors of safety and well-being for people and the environment being considered? The speed at which the traffic travels and the poor visibility gives no chance to a crossing pheasant, let alone a human walking on the side of the road with no curb or footpath. We comment, and I have even said to customer inquiry staff from the council when exasperated, what are we waiting for? Will it take a death or a more serious accident than those that have already occurred on this road before something is done to improve the safety? I hope it does not come to this, and I hope that the small number of people in our community even aware of the request by developers not to undertake roading upgrades prior to construction of further houses is enough to convince this hearing that something must be done earlier than proposed. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Thorley. That's well understood and well presented submission. As you probably just heard me say, I think we'll go through the submitters who are appearing, and then we'll come back with questions on that you can all answer. But certainly, I mean, understand the 2 points, the 2 principal points that you're making, which is early improvements to the roads, and also a request that the construction traffic and so on be in some way discouraged from using Exelby in particular. So thank you for that. And we'll just, the next person on my list is Barbara Barris. I don't know if I don't see.
It's my mum.
Oh, right. Oh, you're in the same room. Even better. Right. Excellent.
We're in the same bubble.
Then, right. Okay. Well, Ms. Barris, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Barbara Barris. My husband and I purchased his grandfather's farm, Edward Exelby, and we have lived and worked on this land and raised our family since 1990. I also retired as a nurse at the local health centre after 15 years of service, and I have formed many lifelong friends in this area and care deeply about my growing family and the community as a whole. I am very concerned for the safety of the people using this road, both in vehicles, as pedestrians and as cyclists. I have the unfortunate front row view of what I deem to be one of the more dangerous blind corners from my kitchen window and gardens, where I daily witness potential hazardous driving and turning of traffic into Cowrie Lane and neighbouring properties from Exelby Road. Trucks are often over the centre white line and many cars also. This corner has zero room for pedestrians to walk on the correct side of the road and very poor visibility for traffic to accommodate cyclists travelling in both directions. It's completely unsafe and is of daily concern to myself, my family and neighbours. In addition to our phone calls to the council over the years requesting pruning and maintenance of the hedge to improve visibility, we have personally paid for the contractor who trims our farm hedges to clear the roadside hedge in an attempt to improve safety for road users. One local resident from Cowrie Lane also chainsawed the hedge as there has been minimal or no maintenance by absent landowner and an inability of Hamilton City Council to enforce the maintenance of a barberry and privet-riddled overgrown hedge line. Recently in level 4 lockdown, a young woman from Norton in a neighbouring community drove through our fence on this corner travelling to work a night shift at her place of work in Huntly and landed in our paddock. This further impacted our fear and concerns we will one day be attending a fatal accident on the corner, as this was the second time a car has gone through our fence in June and again in August this year. This highlights the impact of road safety, not only while subdivisions are under construction and heavy traffic has increased, but also when the overall volume of road users increases as the community grows with the proposed housing development. Our children and grandchildren also have the privilege of living on my husband's grandfather's farm. I have great concern for them walking on the road between our properties, and when traffic is heavy, request that they phone to let me know when they're leaving their property so I can watch out for them. Their parents often request that they phone when they have arrived so they can relax knowing they're safe. This is real evidence of the deep safety concerns for just a 200 to 300 metre stretch of Exelby Road, let alone the rest of the area. My grandson also is not permitted to ride his bike to the local high school due to the narrow width of the road and the number of trucks and fast travelling vehicles. Previously, we have reported our concerns to Hamilton City Council regarding the damage to Exelby Road by heavy trucks during construction of the Rotokauri Rise subdivision, to no avail. Over the summer months, the roads became damaged when the hot tar seal was lifted and formed judder-like bars on the road. Cars would swerve to avoid these and cross the centre line. A motorcyclist also hit one of these bumps on the same corner and came off his bike, requiring hospital treatment. Soon after I phoned the council about this accident, the areas of the road were patched and resealed. Are we waiting for more serious injuries or incidences to occur before this road is made safety? Friends on Rotokauri Road who cycle daily on e-bikes have requested I speak of their feeling threatened by the unsafe use of Exelby, Rotokauri and Burbush roads, particularly by heavy construction traffic. They were unaware of the submission process but expressed their concerns regarding trucks crossing over the centre line on blind corners, traffic travelling in excess speeds and the narrow width of the road for cyclists to share with traffic. I hope it is suitable for me to pass on their concerns to this hearing, as they are further evidence of the number of families in our areas who have not been part of the consultation process or information regarding this subdivision. Please hear our concerns, and I can only hope these guide your decisions on whether the planning for the proposed subdivision on Burbush Road has taken into account the safety and well-being of the Rotokauri community. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Barris. Thank you for your submission. Do I take it that you have others in your collective group, Ms. Thorley?
No, that's from our...
That's it. That's it. All right. Well, thank you for the moment anyway, for both of you. We'll just stay online and I'll come back to you.
Excuse me, it's Shane Withy.
Yes.
I'm actually one of those as well online that I'd like to speak if possible.
Yep. No, you're next on my list. So I've got you down a slightly different name, but that's fine. So you're Withy, not Whitley.
Withy, correct.
Right. All right, Mr. Withy, you're next. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Shane Withy. We own 3 properties within close distance of PC7. One by the Rotokauri School, where we have lived for 25 years. One in Te Kowhai, and a site we've purchased in 2019 we are developing for ourselves at 153 Exelby Road. Leading up to the purchase of this site, I had concerns with the amount of traffic using this road and how it would devalue the property over time. So went onto council site and saw that when stage 1 and 2 were completed, I estimated that we would lose 80 to 90% of the current traffic flow, making for a nice quiet place to live going forward and add value to our property, and proceeded with the purchase on this assumption. Instead of this being the case, in the event stage 3 supersedes 1 and 2, and going by Mr. Black's report, we will go from currently a few hundred vehicle movements a day to upwards of 7,400 movements per day. This will have significant financial impact on the property value and a lot less desirable to live in. We will need to contend with potential health risks, with road dust feeding into our drinking water at our cost to keep our families safe, along with noise being a problem. We will have privacy issues as the road is around 5 meters higher than the build site. Again, we will need to spend significant money in plantings that, had stage 1 and 2 proceeded first, would not have been required. I'm a regular user of Exelby Burbush Road and have been for many years. And as such, I've got to see ever increasing traffic on these roads. I've found that if I'm in Te Rapa area from 4:30 p.m. on, although Google Maps says to use Avalon Drive to get me to Rotokauri address, it is perceived by myself that going to Te Rapa North and back through Exelby Road, as many others do, is quicker, as I don't need to wait in a 2-kilometre traffic down Avalon Drive and constantly driving, giving for a more relaxed drive home. I don't think this has been calculated in Mr. Hill's report, which leaves me to believe that Mr. Black's vehicle movements per day is a more accurate assumption. I've had numerous close calls with others using this road, particularly the sharp right-hand bend just north of Lee Road, where northbound traffic cuts this blind corner, and again 400 metres further up at the apex of the hill before it drops back towards our side at 153 Exelby, with the vehicles over the centre of the road that you can't see until you're on top of them, requiring evasive action by both parties. Cyclists. Nowhere have I seen any reporting on the current users of this road, specifically cyclists. A few months back, a friend of mine was out on his bike with a group of his energetic friends, travelling along Exelby Road, when a ute towing a large boat heading the same direction knocked one of his friends off his bike, sending him into our driveway entry. He had cuts and bruising, but managed his way home without feeling the need to call the authorities. None of my mates' friends use this road anymore on their bike outings because of this instance. Last Saturday, between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m, I was fixing off the roof of my shed, which is 8 meters off the road boundary. In this time, I noted a total of 12 cyclists on a cloudy and very windy day. Come summer, this will be a lot more. My point here is, in the event stage 3 goes ahead and hooks up to the cycle tracks to the north, it is inevitable that more cyclists from the west side, Dinsdale, Frankton, Norton, will want to use Exelby Road to access north of the city, and the road is not safe as it is for this recreational activity. If up to 500 homes are built within PC7 before Exelby South is upgraded, Google tells me that nationally we have 30% of people using bikes recreationally. This suggests that with an average of 2.7 people per home, there will be 400 extra cyclists just within PC7, let alone counting surrounding developments being undertaken. They will not always want to use the northbound cycle tracks and generally like to mix their trips for a change of scenery. If a 1 metre verge was installed to the road as mentioned by others, it is likely that with budget constraints, this verge would be to the contour of the land, having a significant slope to it in places that would likely make cyclists and foot traffic for that matter use the road and again put them in potential harm. This is another reason why I believe that Exelby Burbush Road South needs to be majorly upgraded before any works begin on PC7 with road widening and a compliant footpath installed. I'd also like to say that while undertaking works on my section, I see a lot of very large transporters delivering trucks, diggers, etc., as well as trucks carting backwards and forwards to, I assume, stage 1 developments. This will only get worse when stage 3 goes ahead. Environmental issues. I'm unfamiliar with what has been considered as far as this goes in regards to PC7 and the surrounding area, but I do know that the current system in our area in Exelby Road is poor, with the road outside my property having a drain that collects stormwater from City Council side of the road and pipes it under the road directly into my site, causing flooding and damage to my build site, then eventually feeds into Rotokauri Lake. I've been waiting for 7 weeks for council to get back to me with a resolve in this matter, and no action has come about at this stage. This gives me the overall opinion that the environmental or private landowners issues are not a priority to the council, and they just want to push the buttons that give them money in their coffers without investing themselves. Finally, I would like to add that at no stage has Green Seed invited me to any of the consultations in regards to PC7. Thank you all for taking the time to hear my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Withy, for that. The last speaker before Ms. Perring, I think, is Dennis Dove. Is Dennis Dove there? Okay, he certainly doesn't seem to be named on the screen. He's not staying with or coming through somebody else. Ms. Moroney, have you got any ideas about Mr. Dove?
No, we'll just move forward from him. If he's not turning up, we'll carry on. There's no time to waste.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. In which case, I think we're, oh, well, no, before we turn to Ms. Perring, just check, commissioners, are any questions of any of the submitters?
It'd be interesting just to hear a little bit about the consultation. I mean, there's been statements made that there has been no consultation or information, and then a couple of the others have mentioned that in passing that there was something. Is one of the submitters able, maybe through Ms. Moroney, able to confirm just what did take place, anything or some?
To my knowledge, with probably 57 people, resident people on this area, no consultation and no information has been given to us.
Okay, so the only information you've got, you're saying, is basically what you've got through council as part of this current process that we're going through now.
That is correct. Several of us received a letter from the council regarding this PC7 change. And it's one of those things that you get in the mail, you put to one side. And I happened to be paper shuffling as we run a business, pulled it out 2 weeks prior to the submission having to be lodged, and panicked
Mm.
So you can imagine the 2 weeks was sheer pressure of getting people together and getting notes and getting the submissions entered. We have had no consultations from Green Seed or the council or the Waikato District Council regarding this, other than a letter from Hamilton City Council.
Okay, thanks for that. Just one other question, if I may, Ms. Moroney. The evidence from the proponent or the applicants is pointing out, you know, various upgrades could be taken place at various times, normally conditional or contingent on the amount of housing being allowed. Are there parts of Exelby Road that are better or worse than others? Is there a part of Exelby Road that cries out for an upgrade before anything takes place more than perhaps the whole of the road?
Yes, I think possibly the junction from Exelby Burbush Road is a major.
Is that to the south or to the north of that junction?
I think to the south of that junction, because that area there is more elevated with ups and downs and corners and more variated road.
Okay, thanks for that. That's what the evidence suggests, and that's what I've got marked up here on a plan. So, no, thanks for that.
One other point, there is an extremely sharp corner halfway between State Highway 39 and the Exelby Road, Burbush Road junction, where the road is extremely narrow and the visibility is poor. In the past, there has been several accidents on that corner.
Is that by Curry Lane?
No, this is going from Exelby back to State Highway 39.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much. That's helpful. Thanks.
Shane, did you have anything you wanted to ask?
No further questions, but I've recently driven the area and I appreciate your statement.
Thank you.
And can I just say that for those of us who haven't recently visited the area and can't because of the lockdown, the video was actually very helpful. So thank you for providing the video on that. I mean, we will still have to make a site visit at points where hopefully the side of Christmas when we get liberated. So, Ms. Perring, would you like to give us your thoughts? And thank you again for sending through this morning your additional statement.
Okay, good morning, sorry. So do you want me to read out any of my statement, or you've read it?
I've certainly read it, and I think the others are indicating, but just touch and run on the key parts. I mean, in large measure, I'm not being unkind, you're repeating what you said in your first statement, updating it with agreement at numbers of points with Mr. Black. But yes, why don't you just summarize that for us?
Yeah, look, I think the key points are that this table of upgrades outside of the Rotokauri North area has become so convoluted and complex that it doesn't make sense to me anymore. The landowners can't understand it. It's going to result in cumulative upgrades over time outside these landowners' properties, which can only impact them in terms of amenity, noise and dust and disruption to when they want to travel somewhere as well, with all the roadworks time after time. So, I mean, all the evidence to me suggests that, and especially after hearing what all the landowners have said today, that the only logical conclusion is to make upgrades right from the start, including a footpath to ensure the safety of pedestrians and cyclists. Well, obviously the cyclists wouldn't go on the footpath, but yeah. That's really the gist of it, yeah.
Yeah, no, so I mean, I think the main point coming out of your submission, well, not the main point, but certainly the point that I took from there is your recommendation that in actual fact, everything happened with the development of the first dwelling on new lot.
Yep, right.
Well, perhaps not everything. Let me just check on that, because I mean, I think I can't recall whether you accept or not that should be with respect to Exelbury Road all the way back to Burbush intersection, or more than that or less than that? Let me just check that with you.
Yeah, look, I mean, I do agree with Ms Moroney that the main concerns are for Exelbury Road south of the Burbush intersection. So that if you had to prioritise one area, I would agree that that should be it. As for the remainder of Exelbury Road, I agree with Mr Black's recommendation on that it be widened to 7.7 with, yeah, I don't think he recommends a footpath on that section. The footpath to me is the main concern for that is on Exelbury South.
Yeah, no, all right, no, thank you for that. Well, let's just go to questions in that case. Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Peering. I found your evidence quite helpful, and obviously the applicants responded to some of those points in terms of coming through with bits and pieces. And I can understand there's some confusion in what is being put forward by way of mitigation means or the like. And we'll probably get some additional clarity on that. I think more clarity, particularly, we can look at aerial photographs so much, but you know, we need to get our feet on the ground. It'll be interesting to walk that road as well and just see that's involved. And perhaps that's something the applicant could usefully do with somebody like yourself and some of the others, was actually walk it. But no, I think those points were all well made. I think Mr. Leo Hills has responded to a number of them with the proponent and part of what they've said. I don't have a question other than a comment to see that somebody's politely pointed out to you, or maybe not politely, pointed out to you that you're a planner and not a traffic engineer, and therefore you can't talk about traffic engineering. I can say, as one that's been picked up on that point many times, you just learn to weather that and push on. But thanks very much for your evidence.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, David.
Yes. Shane.
No questions from me, but thank you for your role.
I'm not quite sure whether in your statement that you've given us for today, Ms. Padding, whether you had the opportunity, I can't recall whether you had the opportunity to respond to Mr. Sharman's final statement on that. And if you didn't, whether you wanted to say anything.
I have had time to read it very quickly, and I felt that the content of my presentation that I've already written really
covers those off.
Mr. Sharman's comments. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. Well, thank you for that, and let me just say thank you to all the submitters who obviously have engaged you as well in terms of that. It's always very helpful, and even though we're dealing with a plan change here and not resource consents, and of course there's a lot of matters which will have to be dealt with as correctly pointed out by numbers of witnesses here. A lot of these issues will need to be sorted out through resource consents, but that's not an excuse for not doing what's necessary at this point in the process. So thank you for putting those matters before us.
Great, and I'd just like to acknowledge on behalf of the submitters the helpfulness of Steve Rice as well. He's, for people that haven't been familiar with the process and things, he's been very responsive.
Well, I'm sure Steve will say thank you for that, but on his behalf, yes, we know how Steve works behind the scenes, having worked with him many, many times. So thank you for that. Steve, would you like to say something apart from waving?
No, it's just been my pleasure to help these people out as I go along.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, and thank you for that, Ms. Perry. All right, where are we now? 10:30. Let's just move on, shall we? So I guess we turn to you, Mr. Muldowney, and Council's team.
Thanks, sir. That's unexpectedly quick, I think. I'll just check in and see if Mr. Sharman is available, and also Mr. Black. I see they're still logged in. I'm just not sure if they're following along at the moment.
Let me just check with you too. I mean, would you prefer that we had a short break so that you can have an offline with those two before we reconvene?
Yeah, that might be helpful, sir. I just want to just check in. I mean, so as I understand it, we're really at a situation where the principal witnesses that you need to hear from is Mr. Black first, and then following Mr. Black, obviously Mr. Sharman. I understand that the point that you raised earlier relating to the urban design witnesses was a relatively small point, I think, and I tested it with Mr. Hatting, and effectively, I think he was actually promoting a potential change which would have been even more permissive than what was being promoted by the plan change applicant. So I don't think anything really turns on that one. So I think it's probably all about traffic and planning from here. So if that's the case, perhaps if we could maybe a convenient time to have a quick break and then come back, and we'll probably get a straight run at it right through to lunch.
Right. Okay. Well, let's resume. Shall we say at 10:02? If everybody wants to go and grab a cup of tea, coffee, or whatever, and we'll resume at 10:02. Thank you. Just turn your mics and your videos off, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. Right, thank you, Mr. Muldowney. We're with you.
Thank you, Sir. So as signalled, we've got Mr. Black on first, obviously giving the technical evidence relating to transportation matters, and then he'll be followed by Mr. Sharman. So Mr. Black's prepared, I think, a summary statement of evidence which really represents his crystallised views as the hearing and the evidence has unfolded. He's intending to take you through that document, not reading it verbatim, but he does want to sort of draw out some of the essential points and take his time through some of the brief of evidence, particularly in relation to those critical infrastructure triggers that are the subject of your decision making. So I'll hand over to Mr. Black to walk you through the statement of evidence, and then, as I say, after questions we can move to Mr. Sharman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Muldowney. Thank you, Mr. Black. Also, just whilst you're going through that, let me invite you to just to digress into and comment on the sort of matters that submitters have put before us. I mean, what submitters have put before us this morning is a fairly unified view in terms of what they perceive to be not just the current unsafety of the road itself, but also looking forward to the future increased unsafety. And I guess that just to answer the question that I guess put to us by Ms. Perring, which was, well, why don't we simplify all of this and just make everything happen on day one? So in a nutshell, over to you.
Thank you, sir. I just want to I guess, highlight a couple of the key paragraphs from the summary of my previous report. So paragraph 8 is sort of some commentary on out of sequence development is not good practice, and in this particular instance, inconsistent with the GPS, the government policy statement on land transport, which seeks a transport system we know when is killed or seriously injured and wants to provide people with better transport options. Here, the current transport options for accessing this area are limited, and a lot of the development relies on that future network, which is being provided at some unknown point in time by somebody else. And also the last point on there, D, developing a low carbon transport system. There are very few alternative routes. There are very few destinations where people can walk and cycle. So initially, travel is going to be predominantly by the private motor vehicle, which again, isn't a great outcome from a climate change and reducing vehicle kilometres perspective. So that's sort of some of the things coming from the out of sequence nature of it. Paragraph 11 talks about the additional traffic and highlighting that those traffic changes and the adverse effects from the development are sensitive to the timing and provision of the minor arterial network and staging of the development. We don't have a firm staging plan. We have some triggers that say the first dwelling requires a roundabout at Stairway 39, but beyond that, there's no certainty on where the next pocket of development might be or what it is. So it has been challenging to put together a series of triggers that sort of clearly link infrastructure to staging of development within the site. And linked to that at paragraph 12, the council has no funding for the minor arterial network in its current long-term plan. So there's no money to do construction of that particular piece of infrastructure in the next 10 years. So if funding was available after that, it would still be a number of years. So it's likely to be 15 years or so before that network is provided.
Just tell me, when's the next review of that plan due?
It's only just been released this year. So it will be another 2.5 years before that's updated.
Right. Okay.
So moving on to paragraphs 17 and 18. So again, just reiterating my concerns around the staging. We don't have clear staging that directly links areas of development to specific infrastructure improvements. We're relying on sort of cumulative triggers or an intersection to a road to trigger particular infrastructure upgrades. And at 18, just re-emphasising that approach gives the developer a lot of flexibility, but does mean there's uncertainty for the receiving environment on what infrastructure will be provided when and how development might be staged and implemented and what those effects might be. So yes, at paragraph 20, just reiterating the concerns of Ms. Pearing, that the Rotokauri structure plan was predicated on development from the south to the north, and if that had happened, other developers would have provided their collector networks or part of the minor arterial, and that would support those changes. The walking and cycling facilities would have been progressively upgraded so that residents, when they're affected by development, would likely have a footpath or urban roads that they could use to go and travel around. But this isn't the case with this development being sort of dislocated from the current development and providing its facilities internally. There are triggers that require shared paths back out to the expressway, but that sort of provides for people travelling from the development. It doesn't provide any real mitigation for safety effects for those existing residents on Exelby Road. So paragraph 22, so just again reiterating, there's no funding in the minor arterial network, and emphasising that the scenario I'm concerned about is the potential for full development of this growth cell with no other infrastructure improvements. So effectively relying on the existing rural network and the connection back to the expressway to cater for all the travel from these 2,000 lots.
I'm glad you explained that, because I couldn't make sense of that first sentence in paragraph 22. I think you might have lost a couple of words in it, perhaps.
Yeah, I think there's an occur at the end of the second line, so I think it should read, I'm concerned that full development of the plan change area could occur prior to development of the collector and minor arterial networks.
Well, it was quite useful because I learned from that exercise how I can add text to a statement, so thank you.
At paragraphs 25 and 26, there's been a number of iterations of modelling and modelling information that's been provided. So at 25 and 26, just confirming that the modelling I've relied on is the latest model outputs provided with the fourth joint witness statement. So that was the 2021 transport network with various levels of development on it. So assuming that no other development and no other transport infrastructure was put forward. Paragraph 28 is some of my comments on those model outputs. So the first one being that in those 150 and 500 dwelling scenarios, the majority of the trips from the model are using Stairway 39 to access the expressway and access Hamilton via that route. And that's sort of one of the reasons why I've moved away from my initial 200 dwelling trigger. So the modelling supports that as the shortest route to town, but I guess we've heard from others that that's not always the most attractive route due to congestion on the network and personal preference. So yeah, a word of caution that the model gives an answer, but people are challenging fickle creatures who make up their own minds based on a whole range of factors. And I sort of go on to use Google Maps to demonstrate that there is sensitivity on route choice depending on where connections are made to the network. So the first figure there, one is, with initial development to the roundabout, the Stairway 39, the State Highway network is the fastest, most attractive route from that point of view. But once the connection is made to Burbush Road, the route via Burbush Road and Exelby Road is the shorter route and of a similar travel time to that existing State Highway network. So that's where the trigger now includes once there is a connection to Burbush Road, then that upgrades to the 7.5 metres widening occurs from that first connection to that point there.
I mean, I think Ms. Pearing and others have made the point, and I'll put it in my words because they're not her words, that rural folk are not necessarily rational in the way that you're proposing there, and that they will make all sorts of decisions as to which way they go and so on. We're much more stochastic in terms of the way in which they behave. Or I'm not sure it's just a rural issue, quite frankly. But anyway, what's your response to that?
I agree with that. There's my worst approach. She will drive further to avoid congestion and take a different route depending on how she feels or how she perceives traffic might be up ahead of her. So, yeah, people are not necessarily rational in taking the shortest route or what the route the computer says is the fastest route. And it's also will depend on where people are going. If they're going to a particular activity, these graphs here I was taken to the Hamilton City Council building in the centre of Hamilton. That may not be people's ultimate destinations. This is just one destination that someone might be going to.
Almost certainly won't be there, depending on what sort of decision we make, I guess.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, your point I think is, yeah, I completely agree with the reasons, and that's why I sort of I urge a sense of caution when looking at some of the triggers later on, is that the model gives us an answer, but it almost certainly won't be the answer, because people are fickle and make their own decisions depending on what they're doing in their own perceptions.
But on the other hand, you're criticised for operating on the worst case scenario almost in every case. What's your response to that?
That is that, yes, I make no real apologies for looking at that worst case. That is, we're dealing with an out of sequence development that relies on narrow rural roads for access, and council has no funding for infrastructure in the area. I'm not aware of any other active subdivision applications that council is processing in the southern part of the cell. There's not a lot else happening. The Rotokauri Rise consent was granted in 2018. That's been built out. They're now concentrating on providing the link across to Whitney Drive to enable their town centre. There's not a lot of residential development happening in that southern part of the cell that I'm aware of in terms of applications in with council at the moment.
So, I mean, your advice to us is that we should adopt a worst case scenario because that's the only game on the table, basically.
Yes, there's no certainty that any other infrastructure is going to be provided.
Okay.
David, just while we're on a roll on questions, if I could just interrupt there. In terms of your evidence, one of the points people make sometimes about professional witnesses such as yourself is that once they get on a roll in opposing something, they really get on a roll and hit everything. So they might have 2 or 3 points that they're going to make, but having got those 2 or 3 points down, they say, well, we might as well throw all these other points in and we've got 10 or 12 now. How would you respond to a comment like that if that was made in terms of your evidence?
I guess the walking and cycling is one that's definitely, for existing users, has definitely become more of an issue, and probably not something I dwelt on earlier. So that's definitely been a change in viewing. The walking and cycling discussions we've had have been focused on the users from this cell. But as we learn more information, we need to be able to be agile and change our positions to respond to concerns or information we don't have. For example, one of those is the crash data. We only, if the crash data that is reported by police and recorded, and obviously there are a number of other minor injury, non-injury crashes where people aren't seeking assistance and they're not being recorded, and that provides valuable information to support a change in view. And in this case, there are more safety concerns from users of that road than we had earlier in the process.
Okay, thanks.
So the last in the series of figures at paragraph C on page 10 is Exelby Road. So once again, once that connection out to Exelby Road is provided, the travel time to the CBD is very similar via the State Highway network as it is to via Exelby Road, but those local road networks are actually shorter, and I think people will understand that. So that's one of the new triggers that I proposed in my attachment 4, is that once that connection out to Exelby Road is made, then that northern section of Exelby Road should also be upgraded to that 7.5 metre seal widening. So again, that's that sensitivity of people's perceptions, which route are they going to choose, and that decision appears quite finely balanced. So at paragraph 29, I start with some more discussion on more discussion on that Burbush Road and Exelby Road south of that Burbush Road intersection. I guess the key concern here is that we've agreed to trigger that once you reach 500, a cumulative total of 500 lots, or there's a connection to Burbush Road. There's some seal widening that occurs to 7.5 metres, and I continue to support that position. But my concern is that once we reach 2,000 dwellings and the development is built without any other infrastructure, I don't believe that there are other safety concerns that come into play that haven't been addressed or quantified. So I've attempted to quantify that in the next few pages and come up with some rationale for a trigger for a further set of more safety-focused improvements. So the first couple of paragraphs, 30 and 31, are just on some cross-section standards. 32 just makes that point. Again, the timing of upgrades is uncertain and depends on others to provide that. And I've taken the view that the upgrades and the triggers need to consider that 2,000 lot development on the existing transport network. Paragraph 34 and his reply, paragraph 34 provides my responses to Mr. Hill's statement of reply from last week, where he made 4 points there. And I'll provide a response to each of those in terms of, I'll go through them briefly. Paragraph A, I consider that no development or provision of infrastructure south of the site is a real possibility. Council has no funding. There's not a lot of other development activity taking place, so that needs to be as a real possibility. I think Mr. Hills reinforces that he sees that as unlikely. While it may be unlikely, we still need to be able to. We should have a trigger in the plan that accounts for that situation. If that trigger is not reached because the minor arterial is in place, or through further assessments, there is other infrastructure provided that changes that trigger, then that's the time to look at that. But I think now we need to be able to provide some certainty. The only real scenario is this development with no infrastructure elsewhere. So there's a bit more detail in that paragraph on the types of funding assistance that Council has sought. Council is keen to make the minor arterial happen and has tried on numerous occasions to seek government funding for that, but none of those have been successful. Paragraph B is on speed limits. So speed limits are helpful, but are a separate local government process and rely on politicians weighing up public submissions. And unfortunately, we can't always rely on our politicians to make decisions on speed limits that we want or see as needed. And paragraph C just re-emphasises that there are existing deficiencies on the network, and this proposal will result on more traffic on the network, presenting an increase in risk to those users. And those are the issues that we're faced here. And I guess the submitters have made a really good point through their film and through their submissions on what their concerns are in terms of vehicles crossing centre lines at corners, which head-on crashes at speed can have terrible consequences. And I make the point elsewhere in my statement that crashes involving pedestrians and cyclists at speed are often end up with serious or fatal consequences as well. So we're talking potentially, I guess, about events that don't happen that often, but when they do happen, they have really serious consequences for people. Yeah. Beginning at paragraph 35, so on page 14, I've done some crash analysis to see what the crash rate would be depending on various infrastructure upgrades. So the table there sums up with the existing seal width. We could expect 1 injury crash per year. The proposed widening has some benefits for that. It reduces that crash rate. But once we get up to 7,500 vehicles a day, i.e. full development on this network using this route, the crash rate does get up to 1.58. So options to deal with that is to provide some more seal widening. So I've calculated that if you went out to seal widening of 9.5 metres, you would reduce that crash risk back down to 1. So effectively, the crash rate in the existing 2021 modelled scenario would be equivalent to that. Make the point down at paragraph 38 that simply widening the road may not be the right answer. There are other concerns on the network in terms of the vertical and horizontal geometry and other intersections and accesses. So the provision should be flexible enough not just to simply require more widening, which doesn't address some of those other inherent deficiencies. So that's why the trigger is seal widening to 9.5 metres or other mitigation to achieve that predicted crash rate.
Does the profession have a sort of a gold standard for injury crashes? I mean, is one the sort of the normative number that professionals would look to, or is it less than 1? How do we interpret? I mean, I know what it means in terms of one crash, but what's the standard that the profession is aiming at?
I guess in my view, probably 1 is still quite a low value, but I guess that these models were developed some time ago where we were counting injury crashes. Vision 0 has moved to a real focus on reducing deaths and serious injuries, so not just all crashes, it's those crashes which end up with serious and fatal consequences for people. So head-on crashes or crashes at speed, some of the key factors. So, and that's why I want the provision to have some flexibility so that we're not just widening, so that when you're developing an ITA, you would, or the design for this, you might say, well, here we've got a crest curve here and people can't see over it. So rather than just blandly widening over it, we could lower this crest curve and make the road safer by doing that instead. So sorry, I'm slightly off point, but to address your question, there is no magic number apart from 0.
Yeah. What about Hamilton City? Does Hamilton City have a standard it's aiming at?
Not a numerical standard, but council has adopted the Vision 0 approach. So you're aiming for 0 deaths and serious injuries on the network, but not in an injury sense. No.
That's a strategic decision rather than a fiscal decision, obviously.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Paragraph 38 just makes that point again, that the provisions should be flexible enough to allow for alternative mitigation to be decided. We haven't done a detailed walkover or a survey of the route to look at which intersections or corners you would do, but that's something that I'd expect that a future consent application would be required to do. Paragraph 40, just again reiterating that the development of triggers and the nature of further upgrades is complex. And is sensitive to the staging of development, the scale and location of it, and how it connects to the network. So the point there, and then the next few paragraphs relate to the figure on page 16. So looking at once we've this is me trying to determine what is the appropriate trigger for the next intervention based on sort of dwellings or vehicles per day. So the crash rate of one injury crash per year equates to approximately 5,000 vehicles a day. So it's probably easiest to look at the figure on page 16. So the question I was trying to answer is, when does the traffic volume reach 5,000 vehicles a day as being the trigger for the next round of widening or safety improvements? The grey line on that figure shows what the traffic model volumes are. So it shows that for the up to 500 lots, there's very little change on the southern end of Exelby Road. Again, that's the point I sort of talked to earlier, where that's with all the model is using 500 lots all out to Stateway 39 via the roundabout, and that's saying the shortest route is out via the state highway. So the vast majority of the traffic, almost all that traffic, is going that way. The next scenario that was modelled was the 2,000 lot scenario with an access out to Burbush Road and also the Exelby Road, and that results in a lot of traffic using the southern part of the road. So I've just drawn a straight line between those couple of points there. As I sort of talked about, the driver behaviour may not be what actually, the model may not be reflective of what drivers choose to do. So I've looked at an alternative scenario, so the brown dashed line. So if we assume that there's a straight line of traffic growth from no dwellings all the way through to 2,000 dwellings. And then the red vertical line is that if you assume traffic growth is a straight line, then you end up with a trigger of around 700 lots. But if you adopted the model traffic volumes, then that's closer to 1,000 or 1,100 dwellings. So those were the two triggers, and then taking a more cautious approach, which I think is reasonable given what we've heard from submitters on personal route choice, then that trigger becomes 700 dwellings for that next round of safety improvements. The other line on there is the blue dash line. So the blue dot on the far right hand side of that image is from the initial round of modelling. So the 2041 development with the gross cell built out and all the other transport infrastructure in place, the travel volumes actually reduce on Exelby Road because there are other collector roads and arterial roads for people to use. And in that in that scenario, that 5,000 lot trigger is closer to sort of 1,700 vehicles per day. And that's where I've got to the point where once you've, which for me is close enough to 5,000 vehicles a day. And by then you'd expect in that scenario that a chunk of that would be urbanized. So that's with the minor arterial in place, then I was saying you wouldn't need that next round of improvements wouldn't be triggered. So again, paragraph 40 just summarises that, with uncertainties and staging, and I guess also perhaps route selection should be mentioned in that paragraph. We should be taking a conservative approach to what is the next trigger, and I've adopted 700 lots for the next round of improvements. So moving on to paragraph 47, Exelby Road north of Burbush Road. I've looked at, made the point here around the safety effects for pedestrians and cyclists if they're struck at speed. There's the research is telling us that there's sort of almost 100% chance of fatality when you're struck at 60 kilometers per hour. Sorry, at 70. And sort of a paragraph 55 just reinforcing that the traffic model, in my view, is potentially underestimating the attractiveness of Exelby Road for people, and that's what we've heard from submitters as well. And then paragraph 55, sort of reaching the conclusion that upgrading or widening of Exelby Road should be made once an intersection or a dwelling is made out to that northern section of Exelby Road. So at the moment, there's a trigger that requires the frontage of the site to be developed, to be urbanised when development happens. And what I'm seeking here is that the widening south of the site to occur at that same time once that initial development makes access to Exelby Road. Starting at paragraph 56, so provides an explanation of why I no longer consider a roundabout is required at that Exelby Road, Burbush Road intersection. The latest modelling provided to us sort of illustrates that the majority of the traffic turning there is associated with development out external to the site. So I sort of altered my view from the initial position that a roundabout was needed to agreeing with Mr. Hills that a right turn bay is acceptable at that intersection. The other intersection is Exelby Road, Rotokauri Road, so 2 or 3 kilometres south of the site. And the important paragraph here, I think, is paragraph 59. We're looking at that latest traffic modelling and comparing the different scenarios. In the 500 dwelling scenario, there are 152 vehicles now turning right from Exelby Road from Rotokauri Road into Exelby Road, and that increases to 428 vehicles an hour in the evening peak. So that's one vehicle turning right every 8 seconds through that hour. And that's significantly higher than the earlier modelling, which was sort of 15 or 16 vehicles an hour turning at that intersection. And again, just reiterating the point that the turning volumes here do become lower in those 2041 scenarios once the other infrastructure is provided. So again, this is something that needs to be provided when the minor arterial is not there. The next few paragraphs in the table just look at, again, at crash prediction, trying to make an assessment on when that particular upgrade to a roundabout is needed. And I guess we don't, the modelling has a 500 dwelling scenario and a 2,000 dwelling scenario, but not a whole lot in between. So paragraph 64, I make the point that, in my view, the roundabout upgrade is required somewhere between 500 dwellings and 2,000 dwellings, but with the uncertainty and staging and of the development and infrastructure provided by others, for example, if the Rotokauri Rise development was to happen, that includes a fourth leg to the intersection, so that roundabout may already be provided by them. Due to that uncertainty, I recommend that upgrades provided at the same stage at Exelby Road is widened so that it is provided in advance of those traffic volumes getting to a level where the crash rate increases. And then 65 makes that point. The the traffic volumes are lower once the minor arterial has been constructed. Starting at paragraph 67, I talk about
Sorry, just on that one. So if the minor arterial was constructed before it reaching that number of 500, that wouldn't be necessary. The upgrade wouldn't be necessary.
No, yeah, it's unlikely to be. Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
Unlikely to be, but if that were to occur, if there was for some reasons of finance or whatever, in actual fact, the development didn't proceed as rapidly as is proposed. Is the minor arterial is not contingent upon the development in this part of the development, is it? Part of the structure plan area.
No, the minor arterial is not. Yeah, not
it's independent of that. That's
yes.
right.
Yep.
So if that were to proceed ahead of reaching that number of 500, that upgrade wouldn't be required.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there's probably a line. The point you're making, I guess, is possibly a line that with the minor, similar to sort of 3B.
That's what I'm thinking. Is that's actually quite critical to a number of the propositions that you put forward.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, 67, the Exeter Road, Lee Road intersection. So I think that issue can be resolved through amendments to the ITA requiring that intersection to be considered as part of those broad ITAs. So unless you have any questions on that, I'll carry on. At paragraph 61, Ms. Pearing made some commentary on the road widening leading to increased vehicle speed. So I've addressed that. So starting at paragraph 71, the point that yes, we might get some higher vehicle speeds, but the research does show that the seal widening does have some safety effects. Once people do lose a little bit of control or drift off the road, they're not suddenly in the soggy grass berm.
Right.
76, some commentary on heavy vehicles, where it's very difficult, if not impossible, to restrict heavy vehicles from particular routes.
Yeah.
Speed limits, I've had a discussion with Hamilton City Council staff, and this area is a part of their speed limit program, but they're having challenges with COVID and being able to consult with people in a meaningful way. And also that consultation needs to be in part with Waikato District as well. So there are some challenges to getting that done, but it is on council's to-do list. Starting at paragraph 79, I'll just provide some comments on the walking and cycling.
Just on that heavy vehicle issue. I mean, I'm aware of certainly in the consenting area of quarries, for example, where with GPS these days on vehicles, in actual fact, tracking and those sort of things can quite easily be required to follow routes and to know when things are not following routes. What's your experience with the success of that sort of condition? Again, which is a resource consent condition, not a plan condition per se, but you've effectively dismissed that option. I mean, for good reasons in terms of the ability of local government to enforce it. But a comment on that?
I haven't been involved in sort of monitoring or reviewing any of that, but yes, technology is becoming much better at being able to do that. But I guess at quarries, they potentially have this development could end up with, when construction is happening, you might end up with 100 lots all being developed by 100 different people who are using 100 different contractors. And are all of those contractors going to have that technology? Whereas I think perhaps with quarries, it's more truck and trailer units, most like potentially with larger firms who are more likely to have that technology, whereas potentially some of the subdivision development may be done by smaller contractors using older plant who don't have that technology. So I think it's definitely the way of the future in terms of using that technology, but whether you can wholly rely on it for development of this nature compared to a quarry, they're sort of quite different users and markets.
Yeah, certainly origin and destination is a completely different category. I accept that. Yeah. Okay.
So walking and cycling, just sort of stating my preference that walking and cycling routes be shown on the map. In my experience in processing consents, it does make it easier to have those visual aids rather than relying on written descriptions, but ultimately expressing support for the assessment criteria as proposed.
You know, just with that walking and cycling, one of the points that's been put forward is that if they're not sure about where that would go in terms of a structure plan process, and if it had to be changed, you'd have to go through some sort of procedural, some sort of process or some sort of procedures to change it. Is there not a way that the cycling and walking routes can be shown on a structure plan and then just varied without any great formality?
So yeah, we've done that in my experience in the southern parts of Rotorua with a particular walking and cycling route that was shown on the structure plan, but when the developer got into it, the topography didn't work. We couldn't get walking and cycling grades to happen. So it was agreed through consenting that wasn't a good outcome to try and provide that, and they would do something else elsewhere to sort of provide an alternative connectivity.
Yeah, so, but how would that be done through the formal process of a structure plan? I mean, normally a change to a structure plan requires some sort of formal process.
Yeah, so there was
any way that can be given over as a discretion to a developer or to a land agent or something?
Yeah, I guess in that instance, the discretion was exercised at consenting rather than sort of varying the structure plan.
Yeah, it's very difficult for people to say, well, look, it'd be good to have a cycling and walking route in this particular location, but then when, as you say, when you get to do the earthworking and the likely show that it's shown that not to be feasible, then it seems to be a hell of a process to change it. And sometimes you'll end up having a walking or cycling route in an area that's not conducive to walking and cycling simply because it's too difficult to change through the process. I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but you just raise it as a potential problem.
Yes, yeah, I can see the problem, but I guess is discretion at consenting enough to resolve that issue? You know, for that particular instance, with the structure plan has a bit altered to show that particular link being removed. So, yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I guess it depends on how many indicative things you put on a structure plan, which is always a bit of a debate, isn't it, with respect to structure plans? I mean, we've got indicative neighbourhood parks and things at the moment on the plan, but nothing else. And I guess that would be interesting to hear from Mr. Sharman, because at the end of the day, it comes back to I guess Hamilton City's sort of preference for showing indicative issues on structure plans. But maybe you can talk to us about that a bit later on.
And the last issue is public transport. Yeah, so that section just talks to my support for the proposed map showing the indicative PT routes. I think that's really important to help council out with their PT planning and assessment of where infrastructure might end up in the future. So yeah, and it's just support for that assessment criteria. And just going on to make the point and some commentary on the regional council's letter they provided during the expert witnessing conferencing around providing those initial PT services is really challenging. They don't have any funding for out of PT services to out of sequence development, which again gets back to one of my very early points that this development initially is going to rely on probably the private vehicle, which isn't where climate change objectives and reducing the need for travel by car is leading us to in the future. So just making the point, I guess, in paragraph 90, that the early implementation of those PT services really requires the regional council, the city council, who provides the bus stops and the infrastructure, and the developer to come together to come up with some form of funding agreement or solution that provides a demand responsive service for some of the early stages of the development, but sort of acknowledging that's outside what we can control through the district plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that last point is quite interesting, Mr. Black, because I'm dealing with a plan change next week, and I won't say where it is, but part of that plan change is that the proponent has actually offered to put as part of the plan the provision of a private shuttle to bridge the gap between no provision and some provision. So.
Yes, I guess it comes down to the developer's preference and how they could work that in with the regional council. So yeah, the conclusion, I guess some of the key points in there, paragraph 95, the model may well be underestimating the attractiveness of Exby Road and Burbush Road from the plan change. So that concern's, I guess, supported by what submitters have told us today on how they travel the network. paragraph 96, that's illustrated sort of in my Google Maps assessment, where some of those decisions and travel time and travel distance seem to be quite finely balanced. And in my view, we should be taking a conservative approach to seal widening, particularly on Exeter Road north of Burbush Road, once that connection to Exeter Road is provided. Paragraph 97, just concluding on that seal, that sort of, sorry, I'll start again. Paragraph 97, so emphasising my concerns that we could end up with sort of 7,500 vehicles per day, and the uncertainty in staging does mean that we do need to introduce another trigger, and I'm suggesting a trigger at 700 dwellings to enable triggers a further infrastructure upgrade to that corridor. And then again, a paragraph concluding on the Exeter Road, Rotocarry Road intersection, and upgrading the need to upgrade that to a roundabout as well. And then that final paragraph, attachment 4, it's the council's current view. Mr. Sharma will speak to this too, but that's where we've reached in triggers for that. So being the bold lines being effectively new triggers in addition to where we got to at the end of expert caucusing. So the lines, I guess, in just unbold text sort of agreed between yourselves and the applicant, with the bold text being the new provisions proposed as a result of the analysis I've done through that statement.
Just on that last point, the qualifiers that you got there with respect to, for example, 1B, with the minor arterial in place, you've indicated in there and also later on that the minor arterial needs to provide a continuous connection from and to. Is there some doubt about where they might go, where that arterial might sort of lead off from and end up to?
No, I think the main connection points are there. I guess it's possibly just hinting that I'm not sure how it would be staged. So the Twitney Drive, Taitea Drive intersection is the very southern end of the cell.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so if the minor arterial was provided down that way, but there's also a short leg that heads across to Arthur Porter Drive and to Kowhai Road. So I think once, although we don't have modelling for that particular section, I think once that minor arterial was in place, would provide a much more direct connection into Te Rapa Industrial Area or the base and those other arterial networks. So would provide an element of relief to the existing transport network.
All right. So the point being that the minor arterial needs to be complete from where to go, basically.
Yeah, from the site to the existing arterial network.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Mr. Black. We'll go to additional questions, I think. Alan, you got some additional questions?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Black. It's a pretty comprehensive statement and takes a bit of reading and working through, so that's great. I think people will appreciate that. Have you had the opportunity to look at what's called the further reply statement of Leo Donald Hills? That's what just came through last night.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Have you had a look at that? Have you got any comments to make on that? Because he's obviously looking at responding to, you know, the specific points, some of the specific points you make.
Yeah, the one point is, I guess, the traffic model gives us 2 hourly traffic volumes, and then we've made a number of assumptions to get to a daily traffic volume that I've used in my figures. So yeah, in places, I think in my initial assessment, I used 15% to convert from hourly to daily, whereas Mr. Hills had used 10%, and I've adopted his 10% in my assessment, which gets to 7,500. But if that peak hour was 15%, then that traffic volume does get closer to 5,000 vehicles a day. But I guess we don't have any information to support that at the moment, or pick and choose between one or the other of them. And I guess 10% is probably more typically assumed for that factor, and that's what I've adopted in this latest round of assessments.
Yes, so Mr. Hills points out that he seems to be saying that with further ITAs or integrated transport assessments, the matters that you raise can largely be addressed. Is that a fair comment on what he's saying?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. Yes, and that's sort of how it is framed up, that the ITAs are required to go back and review these particular corridors and intersections. It's my concern with that approach is it does lead us to which developer then becomes responsible for doing a particular thing, and are we at a risk of cumulative effects? Just getting there with this development, say another 50 lots, only another 50 lots. The effects of my development are so small, it doesn't trigger the need to upgrade and widen a couple of kilometres of road. So that's why I believe we need some more certainty in the triggers rather than just kicking the can down the road to a future assessment of a number of subdivisions.
Okay, thanks. So that response is very helpful. Thanks. I don't have any other questions. Thanks, David.
Just pick up on that last point, Mr. Black. So if I read you right on that one, you'd be saying that if this development, if Greenseed was actually going to oversee the entire development, then you wouldn't be quite so concerned about relying upon ITAs. I mean, I've got situations around the country that I'm hearing where in actual fact there is a developer who's standing behind the whole thing from where to go, basically, and you obviously have a different approach with respect to a plan change at that point.
Yeah, I think, yeah, where the developer is in full control and there's some certainty around that, I guess you would perhaps have more comfort in not requiring those future ITAs. But I guess here the adjacent transport network and land use.
Well, no, it's not a matter of not requiring the ITAs. It's a matter of not requiring the if you like, the belts and braces approach that the triggers provide you with.
Yeah, I can see the merits of it, but I guess I haven't pondered that question before.
Okay, no, let me get somewhere else. Am I right in assuming that if there's one metric that's important in terms of underlying your conclusions on all of this, it is this injury rate of 1 per year? That seems to drive a lot of the metrics. In actual fact, when you go, whether it's retrospective or prospective, it seems to drive them.
It does, yeah. That's I was trying to. A lot of the early work is focused on the efficiency effects, and the trigger for the 7.5 meters, the widening to 7.5 meters, was driven by a traffic volume of 2,500 vehicles a day, which is sort of a rural collector. You would expect to be carrying that level of traffic, but that just deals with efficiency. Can you move vehicles from A to B, and doesn't necessarily deal with the safety effects of this. So yeah, I went through a process that tried to delve into those safety effects, and that came up with the one injury crash per year as being what is the equivalent of what that 7.5 meters of widening would be, and then taking that as the baseline that we should be trying to achieve in a safety sense for development after that point.
Right, which is why then, and you heard submitters this morning say that they have a concern that they're going to be revisited on 2 occasions through your particular recommendations. One when the road gets widened to 7.5, and then again sometime later when they come back again and take off another 2 meters. Is that an issue for you?
Yeah, it does have issues in terms of constructability, and you might end up with, as you say, tacking on a part, some widening there, and then tacking on some more later on, and that can become challenging in terms of how the road surface looks and feels if we just do widening. And I guess my expectation is that second round of improvements may not necessarily just be widening. It would be looking at some other works in terms of, is it tree removal, or dealing to some of the banks and corner widening and dealing with specific curves. But we just don't have enough information to sort of say you should be doing X at this intersection now. Yeah. You should be widening this intersection now, or doing this and that. So that's why I think it's important to have an element of flexibility in there.
Right. But when you turn to your intersection recommendations, these are not based on, there's no crash issue with respect to those ones. You're talking about a usage and efficiency.
Sorry, my 3-year-old's just come in. I'll just.
That's all right. We all have those situations, and some of them make really good viewing.
Say hello, and then we'll go find Mum. Yeah, you need to go and see Mum now, okay?
I won't ask whether she believes her father. That would be right.
Oh, that's better than the cat arriving. I had the cat arrive during a video conference recently, but if you tend to leave the cat alone, it settles and just ignore it and hope it's not sitting on the wrong papers.
Yes. Yeah.
Apologies for that. Yeah.
That's all right. That's right. So come back to intersections. Your reasoning for intersections is quite different from the rest of your reasoning. Basically, that's more of an efficiency and predicted use argument.
It's still based on it's two different approaches, I guess. The Exelby Road, Burbush Road intersection. So we're now agreed on a right turn bay as the right treatment there. I guess we're relying on the traffic modelling, saying there's not that many people going to use Exelby Road and that northern section of Exelby Road. So there's not a great change in turning traffic at that intersection. So the right turn bay will, looking at some of the footage, it appears to be, there's no right turn bay and the road's narrow. So if someone is waiting to turn right there at the moment, they're at the risk of being struck from behind. So the right turn bay will deal with that concern. And I think that's appropriate for this development, but further down the track, I think once more development happens, we may end up with a roundabout or something being required there as there is more turning and interaction from here. I guess the other point being if the modelling is showing a lot of the traffic using Burbush Road will just be going straight through that intersection. So there shouldn't be a great deal of right turning traffic associated with the development of that intersection. So I guess on a traffic modelling and not seeing a large number of change in vehicle movements, the turning movements, then that's driven my conclusion back to a right turn bay, which is different to the Rotocarry Road intersection, which is very much safety driven, particularly in that evening peak where people are heading north and turning right from Rotocarry Road into Exelby Road. The intersection at the moment is on quite a tight curve, and the sight distance isn't particularly great in each direction, and there's some topographical challenges as well where Exelby Road and Rotocarry Road both come down to that point. The modelling is showing there that we do end up with, without other infrastructure being in place, quite a significant change in the number of those right turn movements. So that has driven me towards a roundabout as the right answer there in terms of helping to further manage vehicle speeds and provide some clarity on priority and address some of the sight distance concerns by providing a different form of intersection there.
Okay, all right. Thanks for that explanation. Shane, any questions for Mr. Black?
No, Mr. Black has answered my question.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Black. That's a helpful explanation of your brief there. Thank you.
No problem.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, for Greenseed, I hesitate to pipe up, and we resisted the temptation to react badly to the receiving a 22-page detailed brief on a Friday afternoon before a long weekend.
Yeah. In
a week in which we were having a hearing on the Thursday. Mr. Hills advises me that, and it's quite clear from reading it, that this brief from Mr. Black, which we've now spent an hour on dealing with his summary, takes quite a different approach to his original analysis insofar as it now focuses primarily on crash data rather than traffic volumes. That means that in order to join the same conversation, Mr. Hills would need to do a great deal of work. In which we elected to deal with that was to propose a different approach, and that is by dealing with the matter via the ITM down the track when we actually know what's happening on the ground, rather than crystal ball gazing a worst case scenario and then setting triggers now, which obviously will never be right. The other point we need to make, sir, in order for the council to be able to respond is that there's material in this evidence that in relation to public transport and walking and cycling that are contrary to the outcomes in the joint witnessing statement, and which we need to understand now whether Mr. Black has gone on a little journey or whether HCC has joined him. The real point I want to make in this context, sir, other than making that point, is that if Mr. Hills is available, and so are our planning witnesses who prepared the deliberately brief statements in response to Mr. Black's. There won't be an opportunity for, we'll obviously reply, but there won't be another opportunity for you to ask them questions. I would have thought while that questioning is hanging in the air, you may wish to direct some questions to Mr. Hills in relation to that, because otherwise we do it all on paper and we don't have the benefit of Mr. Hills being present. So, sir, the short point is we're not making any formal objection to the introduction of the evidence. We were disappointed that it contains material that is different to what we've seen before in quite a fundamental way and supported by quite detailed data. And if you wanted a detailed response to that will have to be the subject of a separate brief. But if the alternative approach, which we say makes much more sense, has any attraction for the committee, then it may be that you can ask Mr. Hills questions about that now, but he advises that it'd be difficult for him to respond to the detail of Black's evidence at the moment.
Yes, yes. Well, let me just note that when I received, when we received Mr. Black's statement the other day, my immediate response was that I would anticipate I'd anticipated a formal objection in the first instance from Green Seed, so I was a bit surprised when that didn't happen, and that might have set a slightly different agenda. We've now allowed that in. So obviously through questioning. So I think the question for you, Mr. Berry, is how would you prefer to proceed with respect to that brief now that it's formally on the table and you've heard our questions of it? You don't need to respond to that immediately. I agree with you that the implication that there's no point in Mr. Hills responding if in actual fact he can't do so fulsomely, because it deserves that response.
Yes, it may be so that we can ask Mr. Hills, you can ask Mr. Hills that yourself. In response to the first point, sir, we gave quite close consideration to the idea of objecting to the admission of the evidence at all, and took the view that because it dealt with traffic safety issues and because we had nothing to hide, that because it dealt with traffic safety issues, then you would want to hear it, and that Green Seed wouldn't want to be seen to be suppressing information that relates to traffic safety. So there was a deliberate decision not to object to the admission of the evidence, but to deal with it in as shorthand a way as we can.
Yeah, and that's appreciated. I mean, my comment a moment ago was only to the extent that I had anticipated an objection, not that we would necessarily have thrown it out. So do not assume that. I think what we and obviously from what we've heard this morning from submitters, it is a matter of primary concern for theirs. So we do need to deal with the issue in a thorough and competent way. So I'm quite open to receiving. I mean, you know, if you prefer, and let's not determine that now. Let's determine that at the end of the day. But have a conversation with Mr. Hills and your planners, and decide whether you wish to seek a further adjournment for a comprehensive response. And we can do that virtually. There's no issue with that from our point of view. Timing, of course, is an issue. Or whether you wish us to deal with it on the papers and receipt.
Sarah, we'll consider that over lunchtime, and I mean, it may well be that it's worth asking Mr. Hills the extent to which he thinks he can respond. I mean, we'd be very disappointed to adjourn the hearing yet again in order to deal with material that should not have been filed.
Mm.
So we would rather deal with it as expeditiously as possible.
Yeah.
And that might simply be by filing a further brief if necessary at the same time we file our reply, given that otherwise we'll just load the reply up with evidence.
Well, Mr. Hills, could you join the conversation?
Morning, Commissioners.
Mm.
I guess there's some fine detail. I've covered it in a summary, the additional statement you might have read in general, I suppose you could say. And there's some general statements that I can make on that if you'd want me to, but you probably read it. But I think the key difference really relates to, in my opinion, I think there's some absolute upgrades, which we've talked about and we talked about last week. Then there's some that I think are more, I suppose the word is unlikely and based more on worst case scenarios. And I think they are better catered for or dealt with in a future ITA, which are required, where you can have the benefit of what's actually happening at the time. So I think that's the general comment. There are a lot of, I suppose, details on safety rates and which I think the chair you've talked about today, which I could provide some more detail on, I guess, in terms of some reply in that regard, which obviously requires a bit of research and a bit of analysis to do that. So that would be my general comments to that. But I'm happy to take questions now as well if you want, or later, or I'm here all day.
Yeah. Well, let's just broaden this conversation. Alan, what's your sense?
Yeah, no, big thanks for that, David. Yeah, I mean, my concern would be we don't underscore the safety aspects in terms of the potential impacts on residents by sort of getting too concerned with procedure, as Mr. Berry is pointing out. I understand where he's coming from, but I think we need to be sure that we address the safety aspects thoroughly. That seems to have evolved as the key. I mean, there was a concern about stormwater originally, but traffic safety seems to be the prime concern at the moment. I think just in terms of throwing suggestions into the pile and picking up on some of the comments that you've made, Mr. Chair, is that perhaps what we do is receive a further statement of evidence from Mr. Hills addressing the points that have been made by Mr. Black. We receive that as part of the closing submission from Mr. Berry. And we can do that in writing. I don't think it necessarily needs another virtual sort of session, but at the end of the day, if it does, it does. But I mean, that would be a suggestion. I just want to be sure that in terms, and I mean, I'm the one, as you know, I've been expressing some concerns for understanding the whole traffic aspects of this, just making sure that we've got everything down on paper so that when we sit down and sort out where we're going on this, we've got everything we need rather than seeking to have to go back to anybody at all.
Yeah. Mr. Muldowney, have you got a view?
I'd simply endorse the comments of Commissioner Watson that ultimately this is a process which is intended to get to the real issues. And I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that the safety issues associated with the connecting transportation network out to this part of an unsequenced and unfunded growth area is taking on some significance. So I don't accept the criticism that this is evidence that shouldn't have been filed. I think Mr. Black has signalled in both joint witness conferencing and in subsequent engagements that he has these issues that he's identified. But nevertheless, let's get to the issues. So if Mr. Hills has something he wishes to say in response, let's facilitate a way to get there.
Thank you for that. Shane, anything to add?
I agree. Otherwise, the issues with hanging.
Right, Mr. Berry. Goes back to you then on that one. I mean, I'm quite comfortable with receiving a final statement from Mr. Hills as part and parcel of your reply. We can then determine whether or not we have any further questions that we wish to raise if that is the case, but not anticipating that would be necessary. Certainly give you an assurance that we're not going to let this go past the 20th of February next year, whereby suddenly everything has to get withdrawn. So that's top of mind, I know, for a lot of people with plan changes at the moment.
So no, we appreciate that, and the instructions I've just received is that is the course that we will avail ourselves of when we reply, to the extent that a further brief is necessary. We'll file it with that, as long as that's the end of the matter. So thank you for that. The only other thing I'd seek clarification on, while I have the floor, sir, is the extent to which the Hamilton City Council's position now reflects the joint witness statement in relation to public transport, walking and cycling, or whether they're now aligning with Mr. Black, who's decided to take his own position.
Well, I guess we'll hear from Mr. Sharman on that one shortly, on the assumption that he, well, we can't make the assumption he's representing himself, obviously, as an expert planner, but we'll hear from him shortly. So right, we'll proceed on that basis, and we'll hear from Mr. Hills later on this afternoon. I assume it'll be this afternoon by the time we get there. So, Mr. Sharman, do you wish to address us now?
Mr. Chairman, sorry, I'm confused as to the context in which you'd be hearing from Mr. Hills.
Oh, I'm just assuming he'll run us through his reply statement this afternoon. If that's not intended, that's fine.
I see. Sorry, sir. Thank you.
Sharman.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone, or almost afternoon. Good morning.
Do you want to just respond to Mr. Berry's question whilst it's still fresh in your mind?
Yes, I think that's a good idea. So absolutely, the Hamilton City Council 42A team are sticking with the joint witness statement positions on public transport and the walking and cycling, and I'll try and speak for Mr. Black in the sense that he wished to address those points to the extent that he did in his evidence, but that wasn't signalling any shift. And I think the last sentence of the paragraphs that he wrote in response to those topics says as much, but just to confirm anyway, because we've discussed that point, that I'm certainly not signalling any sort of 42A team position change in response to that, and we absolutely respect the positions we reached in expert caucusing.
Okay, right. Thank you for that.
So I'll just find my summary statement, commissioners, which was circulated yesterday, and I'll take it that you've had a chance to read through. I gather that you have. So I won't read it, but I'll just pick up some points. And so there's really two parts to it. So there's just to draw the Commissioner panel back to the 42A report and where we got to on 10 September in terms of that report, and actually what that kind of says in respect of the statutory environment and other things. And then the second point then really is on the transport discussion that we've just been hearing on. So I'll skip through some of this, but at paragraph 7, obviously the section 9 of the section 42A report provided a recommendation to approve the plan change, and then as I explained in paragraph 7, there was analysis of submissions at section 3 of that report, and evaluation of issues and environmental effects at section 4, and then quite a lengthy statutory assessment against the various relevant policy statements and plans, and the legislative framework at section 5. There was commentary on section 32 and 32AA of the Resource Management Act and the framework there, and there was an attachment to the section 42A report which provided 32AA analysis to support the recommendations. And then at section 8, there was a description of the recommended changes to the plan change in respect of the plan provisions, and some analysis of part 2. So I won't, at paragraph 8, I won't kind of read all of it, but there was the broad positive conclusions in the 42A report in respect of environmental effects, and I note there that transport was the most challenging of the effects topic areas. In terms of our the national direction and the national policy statements, that the plan change is consistent with the policy and direction and outcomes promoted by the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, and likewise the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management in terms of the Integrated Catchment Management Plan work that had been done. And so there's references in these paragraphs as to the relevant section of the 42A report. I had a high level of confidence that the plan change is consistent with Te Ture, Whaimana, or Te Awa or Waikato being the vision and strategy for the Waikato River, and also the Waikato Regional Policy Statement, and including, importantly, the implementation method that I've listed there, 6.14.3, which is criteria for alternative land release. And there's quite a lengthy section in the 42A report which just takes you through, commissioners, the different considerations within the regional policy statement that apply, and then the various other regional growth strategies that exist, and also the Waikato Tainui environmental plan. If I just skip down to paragraph 11, so the section 42A report concluded at sections 9.10 and 9.11 with, as I said, a positive recommendation. But at that point in time, on 10 September, there were various outstanding points. And as I'll get to in my updated section a little further down through expert caucusing and discussion, almost all of these have now been dealt with. Just briefly in terms of submitter evidence, so Waka Kotahi, so the hearing evidence was presented by Mr. Wood and Mr. Tyndall last week, and they expressed support for the outcomes of the transport caucusing undertaken, and they advised that there were no outstanding matters from their perspective, and I concur with those statements and have no other issues to bring on that. In terms of the Van Asbeck submission that we heard from this morning from the submitter, there's a brief description there of the submitter issues and also the relief that was sought in that submission. I feel like that issue has been satisfactorily concluded, but I make I guess my position clear at paragraph 15, which is really that solutions are through future design processes for the intersection upgrade and roundabout, and that the various parties, being Waka Kotahi and the landowners and obviously Greenseed, can work through that in their own time through that design process in a consultative manner. Then in paragraph 16, what I've referred to as the landowner submitters, that's really the parties that we heard from this morning, and some of which are represented by Heather Pearing and some aren't. So Ms. Pearing presented evidence in response to those submitters. In most respects, the matters raised by Ms. Pearing on traffic safety matters on Exelby Road and Burbush Road to the south of the Rotorua North Growth Cell are addressed in the statement of evidence presented by Mr. Black this morning. And then at paragraph 18 and the subsequent paragraphs, I've just made some comments on where I've landed on some of the relief that's been sought. So in terms of construction traffic, like other planning experts and other parties, I suppose I struggle to land in a place where I can recommend some response within the district plan provisions through the plan change on this. And there are various tools in the toolkit that council has through Local Government Act and bylaws and things. But it really is an issue that's best dealt with, in my view, through resource consent applications at the suitable time, rather than seeking to manage construction traffic in terms of their routes. And I noted in Ms. Pearing's statement that I read this morning that I use the word prohibition, and I accept that there's plenty of other management levels rather than prohibition, but that last sentence in paragraph 18 could read really management of construction vehicles using a particular road would not be lawful at the plan change stage, and nor justified in my view. At paragraph 19, similarly with the proposed addition of a new clause to the broad integrated transportation assessment provision, construction management plans or similar supporting subdivision or land use consent applications involving large-scale earthworks will typically address potential effects of construction traffic on nearby sites and the wider transport network. And I consider that's the suitable forum for those discussions and considerations. At paragraph 20, in respect of speed restrictions, Mr. Black's addressed that this morning, and so have others through the hearing. So there's a process that's about to kick off in that regard, but otherwise there's really no mechanism through this plan change process to really address speed on public roads.
Just whilst you're on the paragraph 20 then, I note your last comment then, in conjunction with Waikato District Council, is the admin boundary in the midpoint of the road or something, is it?
It is, broadly speaking. So that's the case for Exelby Road. The road itself is the jurisdictional boundary between Hamilton City and Waikato District Council. So there are all sorts of awkwardness in terms of the management of that corridor, and some of the submitters this morning talked about some of those issues with litter and physical work. So I understand it's not always in the centre line of the road, but I think that's the road itself is the boundary, and the precise boundary moves in a few locations, but broadly it is the centre line use.
Right. Okay.
And then at paragraph 21, I've just addressed there some of the proposed amendments to objectives. I mean, I really consider that there is sufficient wording. It might be more generalised perhaps than Ms. Perring has sought, but there's wording there in the policy and objective framework that exists within Chapter 3 as it applies to Rotokauri North. That allows all of those issues to be well managed, and that's supported by broad ITA information requirements and assessment matters as well. And then at paragraph 22, I've just addressed briefly the points around monitoring and construction management plans, which I won't read, but it's there for the commissioners to consider. Then in terms of the updated position, so paragraph 23 really just takes us all on a journey in that the Section 42A report was prepared on 10 September, which is really a long time ago in terms of the amount of effort that's gone into the process since then. So I've listed there the various expert caucusing sessions that then began on 21 September and then concluded on 14 October, which was I think 2 Thursdays ago. And as I advised right at the outset of the hearing, with the exception of the one transport matter, which is table 2 within that transport rule, all of the various other matters that were involved in the caucusing have been agreed, and they've been reported on in the joint witness statements. And I don't intend to relitigate any of those. And I've referenced the Annex A to the reply statement of evidence from Mr. Tollamark and Ms. Fraser-Smith, and they set out the amendments to the district plan provisions, and we fully support those. And aside from one or two very minor matters, which are kind of typographical or kind of errors in nature that I understand are going to be addressed in the right of reply a little later, everything's effectively squared away and resolved, at least between the caucusing parties. And then just to circle back then to the matters that were raised right at the end of the 42A report, I just felt it would be helpful just to kind of bring attention back to them, just to provide some comfort about where they all landed. So the first one, there was a series of stormwater matters that were identified in the Morpham report from Mr. Clark that was attached to the 42A report. And they were fairly technical in nature, and they related to various pieces of information or statements. In the very first stormwater caucusing session, or the only caucusing session on the topic of stormwater, the parties just worked through one by one those points, and they were either able to be addressed or had already been addressed, or the parties agreed did not need to be addressed. So that's reported in the stormwater joint witness statement, and there are no outstanding matters, and there are still no outstanding matters in respect of stormwater. Then the next one then is, so there's a series of Rotokauri North structure plan diagrams that were originally in the plan change as notified, and they're listed there with their references. And through the 42A report, I had recommended the inclusion of a new diagram, which we gave the title figure 2-9C to, which was in respect of public transport, and it may also have shown, I think, walking and cycling from memory. So all of these diagrams have been now agreed through expert caucusing, and that was done through the transport topic and also the planning caucusing. And my comment there is subject to any amendments that the commissioners that you might seek through your decisions. These diagrams are now recommended for approval as part of the plan change provisions.
I do note that that figure 29C has a parenthetical comment that it's not a structure plan map, but an information map only. Is this something that Hamilton City encourages to have in its plans?
It does already. So that's a good point. So it does have a different status in that those first three diagrams really comprise what we should call the structure plan diagrams. Figure 2.9C shows an indicative, well, its title is Indicative Waikato Regional Council Preferred Public Transport Route, and so that was discussed at length in transport caucusing as to what the purpose of that diagram was and what the level of information it should be. And so you're quite correct, sir. Its status is that it's showing a preferred public transport route, and it's intended to be indicative. And then in terms of the Hamilton City District Plan, it is worth looking at the Rotorua structure plan diagrams, of which there are several, and then it's followed by various transport cross-section diagrams and some commercial centre, town centre kind of indicative urban design layouts. And so it is a feature of the plan that there are structure plan diagrams, and then there are diagrams for illustrative purposes. And I think what we were very careful through the caucusing to ensure is where we have a rule provision or a district plan provision that refers to one of these diagrams, that we tried to be very precise about what was the meaning of the words that it was referring to, and what is the meaning of the diagram, and hence the kind of downgrading, if that's the phrase, for figure 29C is that it is indicative and it's showing a preferred route only. So it's has a different status than the provisions that refer to it use that same terminology.
All right, thank you for that.
So what actually happens then if the bus authority, for example, doesn't want to follow that indicative route, that they decide they're going to go another way? Is there any process they need to go through?
Well, so the bus authority is Waikato Regional Council, and so the detail shown on that drawing is from them, and they were involved in the at least some of the caucusing on transport. So our kind of more complex public transport sort of layout of organisations is that Hamilton City Council operate physical infrastructure as they operate the streets as the road controlling authority, and so things like bus stops and markings on road and signage are really provided through Hamilton City Council, but the operator of the buses and the funder of the buses is Waikato Regional Council. So it has to work, it has to be a joined up exercise between those two local authorities, and in this case, a developer like Greenseed. And so we certainly feel confident that Waikato Regional Council support what's shown, because it was derived entirely from them, and none of the parties have changed any of the detail. And so the reason for being indicative is that it just enables a level of flexibility in the future as circumstances might change. But I think all parties accepted that the public transport corridors shown are entirely logical, and that they connect to the commercial centre, and they rely on the collector network, and they rely on the minor arterial corridor. And so
I understand that in terms of who is the authorities in that respect, but irrespective of that, I mean, you've got a line on a plan, the submitter can reasonably have some confidence that's where a future public transport route is going to be. How does that submitter know if that's been moved?
Well, I think if a corridor gets moved, the public transport route will get moved with it. So, for example, if a collector route in the end is delivered in a slightly different alignment than what's shown on the structure plan, within the public transport corridor will move with it. So I think in that sense, it's really conceptual, in that it's not necessarily tied to that exact layout or those physical corridors. it's the public transport routes will follow the collector network and the minor arterial network, and they'll connect with the commercial centre. So they're the concepts that are important on that diagram, rather than it trying to be a really precise layout.
Okay, thanks.
Is there, just thinking about that, Sharon, I mean, is there a provision somewhere that says that, that when that, in this case, when the public transport route is confirmed, then this plan may be substituted for that plan or something similar, just to get around Commissioner Watson's point?
Not really. So the linking assessment matter is the references rule 1.3.3, and then 06 is the public transport provision. So, but that's really an implementation assessment matter at the time of subdivision. So it wouldn't be uncommon, at least in the Hamilton context, that over time elements shown on structure plans are delivered in slightly different ways or in slightly different locations, and the structure plans over time all become a little aged and kind of slightly not reflecting the reality, but then that's their purpose in many ways. So once something's physically built out in the world, then the structure plans really served its purpose in that respect. So if we think about the Rotokoti structure plan, it's a decade old, and there are already elements that are being delivered in different locations and in different ways than what's shown on that drawing. And I think that appears to work well as a mechanism.
So you just rely upon the 10-yearly review to update and revise, presumably, at that point.
Yes, I think so, because really over that 10-year period, what happens is a whole lot of things that are shown on a structure plan become constructed and have precise physical locations. And so that detail can then be reflected back onto the structure plan diagram as the next generation of it.
There does seem to be some inconsistency, though, in the way the structure plan process is used. And I think this is highlighting it, because it seems the understanding that I gain of a structure plan is that it sets in stone many of the things that the people are wanting to see, you know, how it's to be rezoned, the timings, et cetera, and they can only be altered by following some sort of formal process that the structure plan provides. But then when you get to some of the issues like public transport, the alignment of walkways and cycleways, then the people behind the structure plan seem to want to have more flexibility to put those wherever and not be tied down to anything in a structure plan. So there just seems to be this dichotomy or this changed approach to it, whereby some things are really tied down and other things are left floating. And it just seems some of those things that are left floating, like public transport, the alignment of cycleways and walkways, are the very things that submitters are really looking for some certainty with. Is that too cynical? I mean, people say I'm cynical. I accept that.
Well, the context here is a little different in that this is a private plan change, whereas virtually every other structure plan within the Hamilton City District Plan will have been a council-initiated structure planning exercise. So there is a bit of a different context in that way, in that normally, I think, if we think about the Rotokoti structure plan, which was done a decade ago, done by Hamilton City Council, and the landowners and development community were stakeholders and were important, but they weren't driving the precise detail shown on that structure plan. They were inputting into it, and they would have been a submitter then at the hearing of the district plan change. But so in that sense, the context is a little different. And then there are broad words in the operative district plan around the structure plan or elements shown on the structure plan diagrams being delivered in general accordance with the diagram. So I think in a way it's business as usual that not all elements are shown, and public transport actually has not been shown on most structure plans, and on Rotokoti structure plan there might have been perhaps a paragraph or two of text, but I don't think there's anything shown on the structure plan diagram. And then if we think about walking and cycling, well, the Rotokoti structure plan does have a walking and cycling network, but it wasn't one particularly fleshed out with the landowners who happen to own those properties. It was more, it was a council reflection of the world, I suppose, in terms of connecting destinations and the council's view of what a future walking and cycling network might look like. So for a very large area, something like 700 hectares. So, and there certainly wasn't an exercise of kind of walking across all the paddocks on all those routes, and inevitably the need for some of those links, whether it's public transport or walking and cycling is probably the better example. Inevitably, they don't need to link certain things because a development perhaps just changes the need for something, or it's just delivered in a different way, and that's kind of an iterative process that goes on.
Okay, thanks.
And then back to the bullet points then. So we're at paragraph 24, and then the third bullet point. So I think all the parties have recognised that there's a figure 15-4B, which is a transport corridor hierarchy plan, and there's a need to just update that to reflect the changes to the network of collectors that are shown on that particular diagram, and that's just to maintain alignment with the Rotokoti North structure plan diagram as it's evolved, and that's really an administrative matter for Hamilton City Council. So I'm just trying to be explicit that that's a small tidy up that will happen, but without really having any substantive impact, really. And the last point that was just recognised in the end of the Section 42A report was simply that it had been well flagged by Green Seed that there were points that they wished to discuss, and in the end that was the expert caucusing was how that happened. At paragraph 25 then I've just noted a few things. So I completely support the inclusion of figure 15-10 transport upgrades as proposed by Green Seed, as it provides necessary clarity to the rule that we're mainly talking about today, which is 3.6a.4.2f in respect of transport, which is our staging and trigger rule. So that when you dive into that figure, you'll see it's a colour-coded diagram that shows the different corridors that are then referred to within the rule, and in particular to table 2. And then at 26, there's a very small revision to be made to an assessment matter 07, which is really just a wording change that all the parties had overlooked, but it was as agreed in expert caucusing, and so I've talked there about what the change is, and it's in respect of service areas for apartments. It's quite a minor matter. And then at 27, just in respect of duplex layouts and rule 14.4, which is the acceptable solutions code for duplex dwelling, there were just questions on day one, and there was a little discussion earlier about Mr. Hatting, and who's my urban design expert, and there were some points of concern there, and that Mr. Munro referred to them on day one of the hearing. They're just not issues really that I'm going to spend any time on. We're not seeking any changes, and we didn't seek any changes to district plan provisions in the 42A report in response to those, and we didn't raise them in caucusing, and we're not raising them in the hearing. So that's just to provide commissioners just some comfort around.
Let me just ask a question on that one too, having now seen the acceptable solution in reality. Step from permitted activity to an RDA seems like a very large step in actual fact, given that there are so few options in terms of these small scale duplexes. Did you give any thought to, I mean, presumably that's only because you wish to have, or somebody wishes to have the option of declining a proposition that comes forward. Otherwise it could quite easily be a non-notified controlled activity. But so just rehearse quickly, is that the only reason for it being an RDA?
Basically, the other reason might be the Hamilton City District Plan doesn't really rely on controlled activities very much. You'll find very few of them there. So the typical kind of cascade of activity status is permitted to restricted discretionary. I think, and the other point to note is, so Rule 14.4, the acceptable solutions code, and then the elevating activity status. I mean, it's largely intact as it was notified in the plan change, and it's really a set of plan provisions promoted by Green Seed themselves. And it's a little different in its format to other provisions in the district plan, and it might be fair to say that Hamilton City Council planners probably wouldn't have drafted it actually, but we certainly chose to support it, and it just provides a really high level of certainty for Green Seed in particular, that the urban design aspirations that Mr. Munro talked about on day one of the hearing will be delivered, and it's one of the key mechanisms through which they'll be delivered. And the restricted discretionary activity status just provides options for other layouts to be considered through
I'm
the
not sure we've got a
process.
submission on the point anyway, so it's a bit of an academic discussion, this one. Yeah.
A consequential amendment.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later, Alan. Yeah.
Okay, and then paragraph 29, to switch focus then, it's really a supporting statement in terms of Mr. Black.
Just to give you a heads up, Mr. Chairman, we're 6 minutes from the 12:30 lunch break that was requested by Green Sea.
Yes, okay. So I've just tried to, I suppose, clarify in those first paragraphs, really, that when we look at that rule, which is referenced there in paragraph 29, it is only table 2 that's in dispute. So there's no dispute between the parties. It was all agreed in caucusing in terms of table 1 and also the structure and format of the rule. And so everything that Mr. Black talked about this morning was in respect of table 2 and those transport triggers outside of the Rotokauri North growth cell. I'll just read a little bit from paragraph 30. So I consider that a degree of caution is necessary in relation to this matter and support the proposed amendments to table 2 as proposed in Mr. Black's evidence. Council is progressing a notice of requirement process to secure a designation for the north-south minor arterial corridor that's shown on the Rotokauri structure plan, and that's aimed for lodgement in the first quarter of 2022. And this important transport corridor extends from the Taiatea Drive Rotokauri Road roundabout in the south and is intended to travel northwards to connect with the State Highway 39 Burbush Road roundabout. And Burbush Road itself will be realigned to accommodate this. So this transport corridor is the primary arterial corridor serving the wider Rotokauri growth cell and is an important connection to the wider city network to the east and the south. But as Mr. Black said this morning in his evidence, funding for construction of this north-south minor arterial is not currently within Council's long-term plan. And the significance of that is that the version of Table 2 being promoted by Green Sea does not require any further upgrades to transport corridors beyond the proposed seal widening of Burbush Road and Exelby Road and the upgrade to the existing Exelby Road, Burbush Road intersection. These upgrades are required, perhaps I won't read that. So the triggers, I think, are well known to you as the commissioners. So my statement then at the end of 31 is this could mean that up to approximately 2,000 dwellings are constructed within Rotokauri North without further upgrades to transport corridors being required. And I accept that's the ultimate scenario, but I think there's a lot of dwellings between 500 and 2,000 that progressively can start to cause issues on that existing rural road network. And then at 32, development within the south of the wider Rotokauri growth cell is being inhibited by the absence of the Rotokauri Greenway, which is the primary means of stormwater management within the southern part of the growth cell, and that's shown on the Rotokauri structure plan. The design, consenting, land acquisition and construction of the Greenway is a circa $90 million project with construction funding not being within Council's long-term plan. So as a result, housing development within the wider Rotokauri growth cell is inhibited as individual developments are having to manage stormwater internally within each subdivision to achieve the ICMP parameters. So the relevance of this to Rotokauri North is that the northwards extension of the north-south minor arterial corridor as part of housing developments is less likely as a result to be progressed by developers than would otherwise be the case, as housing development is not progressing northwards at pace, nor is it likely to until such time as the Greenway is constructed and functioning. The construction of the Greenway corridor itself is planned over a 3-year timeline. And then at 33, the Table 2 presented in Mr. Black's evidence seeks to address the scenario that is entirely plausible, in my view, where development within Rotokauri North reaches beyond the 500 dwellings or lots threshold, and with the widening upgrade that goes with that, and then that the number of dwellings or lots then far exceeds that threshold with no other obligation on Green Sea to undertake further transport corridor upgrades. The scenario also is that the north-south minor arterial corridor is not constructed by either council or developers until the 2030s, in which case this interim situation persists for more than a decade. So Table 2 is presented in Mr. Black's evidence, addresses this suitably, in my opinion, by imposing a new threshold without the minor arterial corridor being in place. but importantly with no requirement for an upgrade if the minor arterial corridor is in place and connecting to the wider city network. The same upgrade requirement is proposed for Burbush Road between Rotokoti North and Exelby Road, with the same upgrade trigger and also the same exclusion. So I rely on the evidence of Mr. Black in terms of the potential transport safety and efficiency effects on the existing rural road network occurring from development within Rotokoti North beyond the initial threshold of 500 dwellings within Table 2 as promoted by Greenseed. Whilst I accept that the modelling shows the preferred corridor south towards the central city will be via Coda Drive and State Highway 1, inevitably there will be a proportion of traffic generated by Rotokoti North development which does not use that route and instead through personal choice relies on the existing rural roading network. The extent of adverse effects of this on the Exelby Road, Burbush Road and Rotokoti Road part of the network will become progressively less acceptable as the number of dwellings and lots continues to grow beyond 500. This will be particularly the case if the duration of time prior to completion of the north-south minor arterial corridor is a decade or more. So I also rely on Mr. Black's evidence in relation to the suitability of the threshold, and that's explained at paragraph 36. The additional requirements within Table 2 provide sufficient flexibility, whereas if the minor arterial corridor is completed and connects with the Rotokoti North growth cell in a timely manner, then those additional corridor upgrades will not be required. The proposed threshold of 700 dwellings or lots also will likely not be reached for several years with no additional onus on Greenseed until that threshold is reached. And then at 37, I acknowledge the concern expressed by Mr. Hills and evidence that other development will occur in the wider Rotokoti growth cell or within the Waikato district, and then effectively Greenseed might find themselves upgrading corridors in response to traffic generated by other development. So I've agreed there at paragraph 37 that certainly the principle should be that Rotokoti North infrastructure upgrades are reducing effects generated within the Rotokoti North development itself. And at paragraph 38, it should also be noted that any subdivision or land use consent application lodged that's not in compliance with 3.6a, 0.4.2f on transport, including any requirements within Table 2, become a non-complying activity under the provisions. So that's just something for the commissioners to note, and it's something that certainly came up in caucusing, that the way that rule, which deals with 3 waters as well as transport, the way it's drafted, the activity status elevates from restricted discretionary all the way up to non-complying. So it's certainly an important point. And so a lot of the caucusing focus then was making sure that the rule was very crisp in terms of its in terms of everyone's ability to ascertain whether compliance was achieved or not. So there certainly had to be very kind of precise in terms of the triggers for that reason. This still enables an integrated transportation assessment to be lodged with any such application. The consenting process can also allow consideration of analysis of leakage of traffic from other development outside Rotokoti North onto the Exelby Road, Burbush Road and Rotokoti Road rural network to be identified and discounted. And the consenting process can also allow some consent-specific mitigation measures to be considered as perhaps alternatives to the upgrades within Table 2 of the rule. I therefore consider that there is sufficient flexibility within both Table 2 as proposed in Mr. Blake's evidence and the consenting process to appropriately manage the scenario where the north-south minor arterial is not constructed until the 2030s without there being unacceptable transport effects on the existing rural road network. And equally, if the minor arterial corridor is constructed within the next few years, then the Table 2 as proposed accommodates that. And then at conclusion then, I won't read it, but paragraphs 40 and 41. So the recommendation is to approve the plan change, and I've referred to clause 10 of schedule 1 to the RMA there. The various matters listed within section 9.10 of the 42A report have now been either satisfactorily resolved or will be in the case of figure 15.4b as an administrative change. So that's all I have, Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Sharman. Mr. Muldowney, I think since it's gone past, we'll take the Greenseed lunch now and propose to come back at, should we say 1:15? Yep. All right, let's resume at 1:15. Thank you, everybody.